The shadows lengthened across the weathered boardwalk of Copper Creek as the afternoon sun dipped toward the distant mountains. Inside the Golden Spur Saloon, dust motes danced in amber shafts of light that streamed through smudged windows. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Behind the polished bar, Thomas Ryder methodically wiped a glass with practiced precision, his movements as measured and quiet as the man himself. 6 years he'd been tending bar here, and in all that time Julia Carson had never seen him waste a single movement or speak an unnecessary word. Tom's eyes, the color of faded denim, constantly surveyed the room even when it appeared his attention was solely on the spotless glassware before him. His right hand always remained free, a habit so subtle most patrons never noticed. The faded scar that traced from his right temple to the edge of his jaw was the only visible evidence of a life lived beyond these walls. A life no one in Copper Creek spoke about, at least not within earshot of the quiet bartender. The Golden Spur was quiet this afternoon. Just old Hank Simmons nursing his usual whiskey in the corner, and Dr. William Morris reading his medical journal at his regular table. The doctor glanced up occasionally, his eyes meeting Tom's in that knowing way they had. Of all the people in Copper Creek, only Dr. Morris knew why Tom's hands, now so careful with the delicate glassware, had once been feared throughout the Arizona territory. The peaceful routine was interrupted by the jingle of spurs as Sheriff Jackson Thorpe pushed through the batwing doors, his weathered face creased with concern. "Afternoon, Julia, Tom?" He nodded to them both, then made his way to the bar. "Got word from Pine Ridge. The Holloway gang's been spotted heading this way." Tom's hands didn't pause in their work, but something flickered in his eyes, a shadow so brief anyone else might have missed it. Julia didn't miss much, though. She'd been running the Golden Spur long enough to read men better than most could. Read a newspaper. "Vincent Holloway?" she asked, her voice dropping. "Thought he and his bunch stayed north near the railroad." "Times change," Thorpe sighed, accepting the coffee Tom silently placed before him. "They hit 3 banks in the last month. Latest word says they're moving south, probably looking for easier targets now that the railroad's beefed up security." Dr. Morris had set aside his journal, listening intently. "How many in his gang now, Jack?" "5 that we know of," the sheriff replied. "Holloway, Connor Morgan, the Fisher twins, and that young hothead Jared Collins. Mean bunch. They don't just rob, they make a show of it, like to humiliate folks before they kill them." Tom's hands finally stilled on the glass he was polishing. For just a moment, his fingers traced the old scar on his face. A habit none of them had ever mentioned, but all had noticed. "Copper Creek's got nothing worth their trouble," Julia said firmly, as if speaking it would make it true. "They'll pass us by." "Maybe," Thorpe agreed, but his eyes drifted to Tom. "Still, it might be wise to send word to Prescott, get some deputies out here just in case." "Takes 3 days for help to arrive from Prescott," Tom spoke softly, resuming his work. "If they're coming, they'll be here sooner than that." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "You seem mighty sure about that, Tom." "Just arithmetic, Sheriff, nothing more." But his words carried a weight that made the room feel suddenly smaller. Old Hank chose that moment to stumble to his feet, fishing in his pockets for coins. "Reckon I better head home 'fore dark. The clouds rolling in look like rain." He nodded to Julia. "Put it on my tab, Miss Carson." "Just like always, Hank," she smiled, making a note in her ledger as the old man shuffled out. Dr. Morris gathered his things as well. "Think I'll do the same. Tom, don't forget to pick up those medicines I ordered for your headaches. Came in on yesterday's stage." Tom nodded, though everyone in the room knew he hadn't suffered a headache in all the years they'd known him. It was just one of those little fictions they all maintained, like pretending not to notice how he always positioned himself to see every entrance. or how he could recall every word of a conversation from weeks ago. As the afternoon deepened toward evening, Rebecca Miller appeared for her nightly performance, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sunlight as she sat up near the piano. Her voice, when she began to warm up, was sweet and clear, a touch of beauty in a town that often had too little of it. "Ryder coming," Julia announced from her spot by the window, moving fast. Tom's hands remained steady as he arranged bottles on the shelf, but his stance shifted ever so slightly. To most, he still looked like nothing more than a simple bartender, preparing for the evening rush. But Sheriff Thorpe saw how the man's weight had settled on the balls of his feet, ready to move in any direction. The sound of thundering hooves grew louder, then stopped abruptly outside the saloon. The batwing doors burst open, revealing a young ranch hand, his face flushed with exertion and fear. "Sheriff! Sheriff Thorpe! They're coming! The Holloway gang! They just shot up Pine Ridge, killed the sheriff and his deputies. They're headed this way." In the sudden silence that followed, Tom carefully set down the bottle he was holding. His movements were still measured, still precise, but now they carried an entirely different quality, like a mountain lion uncoiling before a leap. "How far?" Thorpe demanded. 2 hours, maybe less. They're moving fast and... The ranch. Hand swallowed hard. "They're killing everyone in their path." Julia's hand went to her throat. "Mother of God!" "Get word to everyone," Thorpe ordered. "Tell them to bar their doors and windows. Nobody on the streets after dark." He turned to Julia. "Might want to close up early tonight." "No," Tom's quiet voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Keep the saloon open, just like any other night." They all turned to look at him, but his eyes were fixed on something distant, seeing perhaps not the bottles and shelves before him, but something from long ago. "Tom?" Julia's voice held a question. "Some folks need to learn," he said softly, "that the quietest rattler strikes, the deepest." Evening crept into Copper Creek like a thief, bringing with it an unseasonable chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The Golden Spur Saloon maintained its usual appearance, but tension hung in the air as thick as tobacco smoke. Rebecca's usual song seemed more melancholy than ever, her voice carrying notes of warning that everyone felt but nobody mentioned. Sheriff Thorpe had positioned himself by the window, occasionally glancing down the darkening street. The few patrons who remained hunched over their drinks, speaking in whispers as if afraid their voices might carry beyond the saloon walls. Even old Hank had sobered up enough to notice the change in atmosphere, his rheumy eyes darting between the door and Tom's steady presence behind the bar. "2 riders coming in from the south," Thorpe announced, his hand instinctively moving to his gun belt. The saloon fell silent, save for the soft clink of glasses as Tom continued his work. The riders turned out to be nothing more than traveling salesmen seeking shelter for the night, but their news brought no comfort. "Passed through Pine Ridge this morning," the older of the 2 men said, hands shaking slightly as he lifted his whiskey. "Never seen anything like it. They didn't just rob the bank, they made examples of anyone who looked at them wrong. Sheriff Palmer..." He trailed off, taking another drink. "What about Sheriff Palmer?" Julia pressed, though her face suggested she didn't really want to know. "They made him watch while they shot his deputies, then they tied him to his horse and..." The salesman couldn't finish. Dr. Morris, who had returned to the saloon despite the growing danger, spoke up from his corner. "How many dead?" 7 that I counted. Would have been more, but it seems they wanted to leave enough folks alive to spread the word about what happens when you stand up to the Holloway gang. Tom's movements had slowed almost imperceptibly as he listened. To most, he appeared absorbed in his task of inventory, but Julia noticed how his right hand kept straying to a spot under the bar where she knew a shotgun had hung unused for the past 6 years. The younger salesman, trying to lighten the mood, attempted a joke. Lucky for us, we've got a sheriff here, right? Though I reckon even the law might want to think twice about facing Vincent Holloway. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They say he's got 23 notches on his gun. A strange sound came from behind the bar, something between a scoff and a sigh. All eyes turned to Tom, who had paused in his work. "Something funny about that bartender?" the young man asked, a slight edge to his voice. 23 notches, Tom said quietly, resuming his task. Man who needs to count that high isn't much of a gunfighter. The salesman's face reddened. "What would you know about it? You're just a—" "That's enough," Julia cut in sharply. "Tom, could you check the cellar? I think we're running low on that Kentucky bourbon." Tom nodded and moved toward the cellar door. As he passed Dr. Morris's table, the physician spoke in a voice only Tom could hear. "Your old wound bothering you?" Not yet," Tom replied softly, "but it will be." Grace struck up another song, this one about a serpent in the garden, and Sheriff Thorpe moved to the bar. "Julia, a word." He glanced around before continuing in a low voice. "You should know. I sent a Ryder to Prescott, but even if they send help immediately, they won't get here in time." "I know," Julia finished, looking toward the cellar door. "Jack, about Tom," the sheriff warned. "Some secrets are best left buried." But secrets, like corpses, had a way of rising to the surface. This became apparent when 3 local cowhands burst into the saloon, their faces pale with fear. "Found Jimmy Watson's body out by Broken Spoke Creek," one of them reported breathlessly. "Shot clean through the head, execution style. His horse was still saddled, hadn't been dead for more than an hour." The news hit the room like a physical blow. Jimmy Watson was just a kid, barely 17, who helped his uncle run the general store. "They're closer than we thought," Thorpe grimaced. "Julia, maybe now's the time to—" The sound of shattering glass cut through the air as the young salesman dropped his bottle. But it wasn't the noise that silenced the room, it was what followed. From somewhere in the darkness outside came the distant but unmistakable sound of gunfire, followed by screams. Tom emerged from the cellar, his face impossible to read, but there was something different about him now. Something in the way he moved, as if the quiet bartender was slowly falling away, like an ill-fitting coat. "Sheriff," he said, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there before, "you might want to get these folks home while they can still make it." Thorpe studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, everyone out. Head straight home, bar your doors." He turned to Julia. "You too." "This is my saloon." She started to protest, but Tom interrupted. "Please, Miss Julia, for once, don't argue." Something in his tone made her pause. She'd never heard him speak that way before, like a man who knew exactly what was coming and had seen it all before. As the patrons hurriedly filed out, Dr. Morris lingered. "Need any help?" "Best get your medical bag ready, Will," Tom replied, beginning to move bottles from the top shelf to below the bar. "Something tells me you'll need it before morning." The sound of distant gunfire came again, closer this time, accompanied by the wild whoops of men who had left their humanity somewhere in the dust of their trail. The Holloway gang was coming, and with them, the end of peace in Copper Creek. As Julia finally allowed herself to be led out by Sheriff Thorpe, she looked back at Tom. He stood behind his bar as he had countless times before, but now she saw what she'd been blind to all these years. The way he held himself, the deliberate precision of his movements, the watchful eyes that missed nothing. This wasn't just a man who'd seen violence. This was a man who had once been violence itself. The Holloway gang didn't so much enter Copper Creek as they infected it. Their arrival brought a silence that swept through the streets like a prairie fire. extinguishing all signs of life. Only the Golden Spur's lights remained bright, a beacon in the growing darkness. Tom heard them before he saw them, the synchronized rhythm of 5 horses moving at a deliberate pace. Not the hurried gallop of men running from the law, but the confident stride of predators who feared nothing in their path. He kept wiping the same glass, his movements unchanged as the sound of boots and spurs grew louder on the wooden sidewalk outside. The bat-wing doors exploded inward with unnecessary force. Vince Holloway entered first, a tall man with flame-red hair and a scarlet bandana at his throat. His duster was expensive, but spattered with dark stains that wouldn't wash out. Behind him came Connor Morgan, lean and snake-like, followed by the Fisher twins. So similar in appearance they seemed to be reflections of each other. Young Jared Collins brought up the rear, practically bouncing with poorly contained energy. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Holloway's voice carried the hint of educated roots gone to seed. "Seems most establishments in this charming town decided to close early. How hospitable of you to stay open for weary travelers." Tom set down his glass with careful precision. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" "Gentlemen," Morgan laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Hear that, Vince? He called us gentlemen." "Your best whiskey," Holloway ordered, dropping into a chair and propping his boots on the table. "Leave the bottle." Tom reached for the top shelf, his movements measured and deliberate. He could feel their eyes on him, 5 sets of them, watching for any sign of fear or resistance. He gave them neither. "You boys aren't from around here," Tom observed quietly, placing the bottle and glasses on their table. "What gave it away?" Samuel Fisher, or perhaps it was Eli, grinned. "The way you carry your guns," Tom replied, turning back toward the bar. "Low on the hip, railroad style. Nobody out here draws from that position." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Holloway's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem to know a lot about guns for a bartender." "Man learns things," Tom shrugged, resuming his endless glass polishing. Young Collins, clearly itching to prove himself, drew his pistol with a flourish. "Man learns things, huh? Learn anything about this?" He spun the gun around his finger, showing off. "Learn, that's a good way to shoot yourself," Tom replied without looking up. The gang laughed, all except Holloway, who studied Tom with growing interest. "You got a name, barkeep?" "Tom, just Tom." "Just Tom." Holloway nodded slowly, then, without warning, swept his arm across the table, sending bottles and glasses crashing to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Well, Tom, you know what I think?" Holloway rose, his voice turning ugly. "I think you're lying to me, and I don't like being lied to." Tom finally looked up, his face impassive. Bottle was $8. The Fisher twins burst out laughing, but Holloway silenced them with a look. He approached the bar slowly, like a wolf closing in on prey. $8? That's steep for rot-gut whiskey." He reached into his coat and pulled out a coin, flicking it onto the bar. "Here's 2 bits, buy yourself some manners." Tom looked at the coin, then back at Holloway. "Still owes 7 to 75? "Connor," Holloway said softly, "show our friend here what we do to mouthy bartenders." Morgan grinned and started forward, but at that moment, the doors swung open again. Sheriff Jackson Thorpe stood framed in the doorway, his badge catching the lamplight. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, calm as Sunday morning. "Might want to reconsider whatever you're thinking. A sheriff in this little dust heap? Must be our lucky day." Holloway turned to face him fully. "Way I hear it," Thorpe continued, stepping inside. "Pine Ridge is missing a sheriff and some deputies. You boys wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Can't say that we do," Holloway replied, though his eyes glittered dangerously. "Though I did hear something interesting about Pine Ridge. Heard their sheriff was a coward, ran and hid while good men died." His hand drifted toward his gun. "You're not a coward, are you, Sheriff?" Everything happened at once. Thorpe's hand dropped to his holster, but Holloway was faster. The shot echoed like thunder in the confined space. Thorpe stumbled backward, red blooming across his chest. "Jack!" Tom's voice cracked for the first time, genuine emotion breaking through his careful facade. "Stay behind the bar," Thorpe gasped, then crumpled to the floor. Holloway holstered his smoking gun. Now where were we? Ah yes, teaching some manners to our friend the bartender. Connor Morgan moved forward again, cracking his knuckles, but this time something had changed in Tom's demeanor. His hands had stopped their endless wiping motion. His shoulders had straightened almost imperceptibly, and his eyes had taken on a look that made even Morgan hesitate. "Been a long time since I killed a man," Tom said softly, almost to himself. "Promised myself I was done with it." "Kill him," Holloway ordered, annoyed by the delay. "Kill him slowly." Morgan reached across the bar to grab Tom's shirt, and that's when everything changed. Tom's hand moved faster than seemed humanly possible, catching Morgan's wrist and yanking him forward. There was a sharp crack as Morgan's face met the solid oak bar. He dropped like a stone, blood pooling beneath his broken nose. "Well, well," Holloway drawled, though his hand had dropped back to his gun. "Looks like our quiet bartender has some fight in him after all." The Fisher twins spread out, flanking the bar. Young Collins bounced on his toes, eager for action. But Tom stood perfectly still now, his eyes fixed on Thorpe's motionless form. "Last chance," he said, his voice carrying a weight it hadn't possessed before. "Take your friend and ride out. Don't make me break my promise." Holloway's laugh was genuine this time. "Or what? You'll serve us to death?" He drew his gun with lightning speed. "I think it's time we—" The sound of a shotgun being racked cut through his words. Tom had produced the weapon from under the bar, its double barrels now pointed squarely at Holloway's chest. "That's what you had in mind all along, wasn't it?" Holloway's smile turned cold. "Hiding a scattergun under the bar. Problem is, old man, you can only kill one of us before the others cut you down." "True," Tom agreed. Then, with deliberate care, he set the shotgun on the bar. "That's why I won't be using it." His right hand dropped to his side where no gun had been visible moments before, but now somehow a well-worn Colt gleamed in his grip, as if it had materialized from thin air. "Been a while," Tom said softly, "since anyone called me the Desert Phantom." The name fell into the room like a stone into still water, creating ripples of recognition across the faces of Holloway's gang. Even Connor Morgan, still groggy from his encounter with the bar, stopped trying to stem his bleeding nose. "The Desert Phantom," young Collins whispered, his earlier bravado evaporating. That's just a story. They say he died years ago." "Stories," Tom said quietly, his gun unwavering, "have a way of coming back to life." Holloway's face had lost some of its color, but his arrogant smile remained fixed. "I heard of you. They say you killed 30 men in a single year. Say you could shoot a man's gun out of his hand at 50 paces. If I'd killed that many," Tom replied, "I wouldn't have bothered counting." The Fisher twins exchanged glances, their synchronized movements betraying their nervousness. They had spread out too far, trying to flank the bar, and now found themselves exposed. "Boy," Tom addressed Collins without taking his eyes off Holloway, "I'm going to give you a chance your friends won't get. You're young enough to learn from mistakes. Walk out now, leave your gun, and don't stop riding till you hit Mexico." Collins looked uncertainly at Holloway, who spoke through clenched teeth. "You take one step toward that door, boy, and I'll kill you myself." Behind the bar, Tom shifted his weight slightly. The movement was almost imperceptible, but it caused all 5 men to flinch. "Last chance, kid. Be smart." For a moment, the young gunslinger seemed to waver. Then his face hardened, No one calls me kid." His hand dropped to his gun. What happened next was so fast, it seemed like a single motion. Collins drew his gun, clearing leather with impressive speed, but Tom was faster, impossibly faster. His first shot took Collins's gun hand, spinning the weapon away in a spray of blood. His second caught the young man's shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the floor. The Fisher twins drew in perfect unison, their movements mirror images of each other. Tom's gun seemed to speak twice more without him even looking in their direction. Both twins stumbled backward, clutching their gun arms, their weapons clattering. To the floor. "You've lost your edge, Phantom," Holloway sneered, though sweat had broken out on his forehead. "Time was, you'd have killed them all." "Still might," Tom replied calmly. "Depends on what happens next." Connor Morgan had managed to regain his feet, blood still streaming from his nose. His hand strayed toward his gun. "I wouldn't," Tom warned. "You're slower than the others, and I've got one bullet left." "One bullet?" Holloway laughed, but there was a hysterical edge to it. "Against the two of us? Those aren't good odds, old man." "Better than you think." Tom's eyes flickered to Thorpe's still form. "Jack was more than just a sheriff to me. He was there that day in Silver Canyon when I hung up my guns. Made me promise to stop killing, made me swear I'd find another way." His voice grew softer, but he's dead now and that promise died with him. A movement caught Tom's eye. Julia Carson stood in the doorway, a rifle in her hands. She had returned despite his warnings, drawn by the sound of gunfire. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. She understood, stepping back into the shadows. "Silver Canyon," Holloway said slowly, recognition dawning. "That's where you killed Mad Dog Martinez and his whole gang. 8 men, they say." "9, Tom corrected. "People always forget about the lookout. And now you." Morgan spat blood onto the floor. "How the mighty have fallen." "Man needs peace," Tom replied. "I found mine here until you brought war to my door." Outside, thunder rumbled, a storm approaching, or perhaps just the echo of the earlier gunfire. The wounded men groaned softly, but no one moved to help them. "Way I see it," Holloway said, his voice taking on a reasonable tone, "we're at a stalemate. You're good, maybe the best there ever was. But you can't watch all of us at once. The minute you turn to shoot one, the other will put you down." "True," Tom agreed. "If I was still the man who needed to outdraw his enemies." He nodded toward. "The shotgun's still lying on the bar, but I own a saloon now, and a saloon owner, well, he likes to keep a few surprises under the bar." Holloway's eyes widened as he spotted the thin wire running from behind the bar to the shotgun's trigger. Tom's boot was resting on something, a pedal, probably salvaged from an old piano. "First man to draw," Tom explained quietly. "Gets both barrels. Won't even need to aim. After that," he shrugged, "like you said, one bullet left." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the wounded had stopped their moaning, sensing the tension building toward its breaking point. "You're bluffing," Morgan growled, but his hand had moved away from his gun. "Maybe," Tom agreed. "Question is, who wants to find out first?" A drop of sweat rolled down Holloway's temple. His fingers twitched near his gun, but he didn't draw. The legend of the Desert Phantom had grown over the years, but the reality standing before them was somehow more terrifying than the stories. "We could still work this out," Holloway said, forcing a smile. "Way I hear it, you used to ride with some pretty rough men yourself. Maybe we could—" "You killed my friend," Tom interrupted, his voice colder than anyone in the room had ever. "Heard it. There's only one way this works out now." Behind them, Dr. Morris had silently entered through the back door and was checking Thorpe's pulse. He caught Tom's eye and gave a slight nod. The sheriff was alive. Barely. The knowledge seemed to change something in Tom's demeanor. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of finality. "I've spent 6 years serving drinks to good men and bad, listening to their stories. watching their habits, learning how each man draws, how each man thinks. Neither Holloway nor Morgan answered, but their eyes were fixed on his gun hand. And you know what I learned? I learned that the quiet ones, Tom's finger tightened imperceptibly on the trigger, are always the most dangerous. Thunder rolled outside as Dr. Morris worked frantically to save Sheriff Thorpe's life. The wounded Fisher twins huddled in a corner, while young Collins lay unconscious, his bleeding slowed by a makeshift tourniquet. The standoff between Tom, Holloway, and Morgan had stretched into a deadly silence. "You know," Holloway said, his voice unnaturally calm, "I heard another story about the Desert Phantom. They say you disappeared after Silver Canyon because of a woman. That true?" Something flickered in Tom's eyes, a shadow of old pain. "Hit a nerve, did I?" Holloway's smile widened. "They say she died. Say you weren't fast enough to save her." "Connor," Morgan warned, seeing something change in Tom's expression. "Maria," Tom said softly, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. "Her name was Maria." Julia, still watching from the shadows near the door, saw Tom's hands tremble slightly, the first sign of emotion he had shown all night. "Ah, so it is true." Holloway pressed his advantage. "The great Desert Phantom brought low by a woman's death. Tell me, did she die quick, or—" The shotgun roared, its double blast deafening in the confined space. Holloway and Morgan dove in opposite directions as splinters exploded from the wall behind where they had been standing. Tom's boot had pressed the pedal, but he hadn't aimed to kill, only to scatter them. "That was your surprise under the bar." Holloway laughed, rolling to his feet. "Now what?" "Now," Tom said quietly, "we do this the old way." His gun seemed to materialize in his hand again, but this time Holloway was ready. Both men fired simultaneously. Tom's bullet took Holloway's hat off, while Holloway's shot creased Tom's shoulder, tearing his shirt and drawing blood. "First, blood to me." Holloway grinned, but his smile faded as he saw Tom hadn't even flinched. "You know why they called me the Desert Phantom?" Tom asked, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "Wasn't for the obvious reasons, wasn't because I was quiet or fast or deadly, though I was all those things." He stepped out from behind the bar for the first time, his movements liquid smooth despite his wound. "It was because of what Sheriff Thorpe taught me, back when he was just Deputy Jack, and I was just another angry kid with a fast gun." "Shut up and fight," Holloway snarled, but his voice shook slightly. "Jack taught me that a man's shadow is always with him, but you only see it when there's light." Tom took another step forward. "He taught me that every killer, every murderer, every man who thinks his gun makes him important, they all cast shadows too. And if you watch those shadows long enough," his gun barked once more, and Morgan screamed. His hidden derringer, half drawn from his boot, clattered across the floor. "You can see what they're going to do before they do it." "Impossible," Morgan gasped, clutching his bleeding hand. 6 years, Tom continued, his eyes never leaving Holloway. 6 years I've watched men draw their guns in this saloon, watched their shoulders tense, their weight shift, their shadows move across the floor. 1,000 little tells that say when a man's about to kill. Fascinating lesson, Holloway sneered, but he had gone pale. "Why did you become a bartender? To study your prey?" For the first time, real emotion crept into Tom's voice. "I became a bartender because Jack showed me there was more to life than killing. He taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by his speed with a gun or the notches on his belt. He taught me about peace." "Peace?" Holloway laughed harshly. "Peace is for cowards. Peace is for—" "Peace," Tom cut him off, "is for men who've seen enough death to know its true cost. Jack taught me that, Maria taught me that, and for 6 years I lived it until now." "Until now," Holloway said softly. "Until now." Tom agreed. Dr. Morris's voice cut through the tension. "I've got the bleeding stopped, but he needs proper care and soon." "You hear that?" Tom's voice hardened. "The man you shot, the man who taught me everything I know about being human instead of just being a killer, he's still alive, which means my promise to him still holds." Something like hope flickered across Holloway's face. "So you won't—" "But here's what Jack never understood," Tom continued as if Holloway hadn't spoken. "Sometimes a man has to break a promise to keep a bigger one. Sometimes peace can only be protected by men willing to do violence." Thunder crashed again, closer now, and rain began to patter against the windows. In that moment, Julia saw the transformation complete, saw the quiet bartender she'd known for 6 years become something else entirely. The desert phantom no longer seemed like just a legend. "I know what you're thinking," Tom said softly. "You're thinking that even if I am who I say I am, it's been 6 years. You're thinking maybe I've lost my edge, gotten soft serving drinks to cowboys and settlers." His gun disappeared into its holster, a holster that somehow seemed more visible now, as if it had always been there, waiting. "You're thinking that you're still faster than some washed-up legend, that the stories about me were just that. Stories, weren't they?" Holloway's hand hovered near his gun. "No," Tom said simply. "They weren't stories. They were warnings." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room in stark white. In that frozen moment, Julia saw them all like figures in a photograph. Holloway coiled to strike, Morgan bleeding on the floor, the Fisher twins huddled in their corner, Dr. Morris working desperately over Thorpe's still form, and Tom. Tom stood like a man who had finally stopped pretending to be something he wasn't. The phantom had returned. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Surrender. Face the law. Live to see another sunrise." Holloway's smile was terrible to behold. "You know I won't." "No," Tom agreed, his voice heavy with certainty. "You won't." The rain drummed against the saloon windows, nature's own percussion for the deadly dance about to unfold. Lightning flickered. Again, and in its stark illumination, Tom's shadow stretched across the floor, long and dark, like the reputation that had followed him all these years. "Before this goes any further," Tom said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "there's something you should know about watching men die." Holloway's eyebrows rose slightly. "And what's that?" "It changes you every time. Each death leaves a mark that can't be washed away." Tom's eyes drifted to the wounded men around the room. "That's another thing Jack taught me. Why he made me. Swear to find another way." "Touching," Holloway sneered, but his eyes betrayed his unease. "Is this how the great desert phantom fights now? By talking his enemies to death?" "No," Tom replied calmly. "This is how he gives them a chance to live." His gaze swept the room. "All of you, listen carefully, because these next few minutes will determine who walks out of here." Julia, still by the door, saw something she'd never witnessed before. Tom was teaching, just as Sheriff Thorpe had once taught him, but his lesson was painted in shades of survival and death. "Most men," Tom continued, "think gunfighting is about who can draw fastest, shoot straightest." He shook his head slowly. "But it's about reading, about knowing." As if to demonstrate, his hand moved like lightning, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. The bullet knocked Morgan's second hidden gun, this one from his sleeve, across the floor before the man could fully produce it. "Like knowing when a man's about to do something stupid," Tom added quietly. Morgan cursed, clutching his newly bleeding hand. The Fisher twins pressed themselves further into their corner, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. "You've been watching us," Holloway realized aloud. "All this time we've been talking, reading us like you said." 6 years serving drinks," Tom nodded. "You learn to read men, the way they stand, the way they breathe, the way their eyes move." His voice took on an instructor's tone. Like how your right foot turns out slightly before you draw, or how Morgan's left eye twitches when he's about to try something foolish. Holloway's face darkened. You think knowing tricks makes you invincible? No, Tom replied, but it means I can do this. His gun disappeared into its holster again. He turned his back on Holloway, walking to the bar with measured steps. Behind him, Holloway's hand darted toward his gun. I wouldn't, Tom said without turning. Your weight's on your back foot. You'd miss. Holloway's hand froze, his face a mask of frustrated rage. You're just guessing. Am I? Tom picked up a bottle, poured 2 glasses. Your breathing changed, shortened. Your spurs clinked when you shifted your weight. The floorboard under your left boot creaked. He turned, holding both glasses. Little things. Things most men never notice. He set 1 glass at each end of the bar, but Jack noticed them, taught me to notice them too, turned me from a fast gun into something else entirely. A bartender, Holloway spat. A student, Tom corrected. Every man who walked into this saloon taught me something. How bullies telegraph their punches, how liars blink too often, and how killers, he looked directly at Holloway, can't keep their eyes off their target. As if to prove his point, Holloway's gaze darted to Tom's gun hand, then back to his face. The Desert Phantom, one of the Fisher twins whispered. They say he could shoot a man's gun hand at 50 paces in pitch darkness. Could, Tom agreed. Can, because Jack taught me that in darkness you don't need to see. You listen, you feel, you know. To demonstrate, he closed his eyes. Right now, Morgan is trying to inch toward the shotgun on the floor. The Fisher boys are thinking about making a break for the back door. And you, Holloway, his eyes opened, you're wondering if you can get to that derringer in your vest before I can draw. The outlaw's face went pale. No one had seen the hidden gun. It was completely concealed by his vest. How? Holloway started. The way your vest hangs, the slight bulge, the way you keep your left elbow tucked in. Tom's voice was almost gentle now. Details, always details. Dr. Morris spoke up from where he worked on Thorpe. The sheriff's stable, but his pulse is weak. He needs a doctor's office, proper tools. Tom nodded without taking his eyes off Holloway. Then it's time to end this, one way or another. You can't take all of us at once, Holloway said, but his voice lacked conviction. Don't need to. Already know what you're all going to do. Yes, Tom's voice hardened slightly. The twins will run. They're cowards at heart. Morgan will try something clever and get himself killed. And you, he paused, you'll go for your gun because your pride won't let you do anything else. You're awfully sure of yourself, Holloway growled. No, Tom corrected. I'm sure of you. Men like you, they're all the same. Think their reputation makes them special. Think being feared makes them important. He shook his head slowly. But fear is just another tell, another shadow to read. Lightning flashed again, and this time when the thunder rolled, it seemed to shake the very foundations of the saloon. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. Last chance, Tom said quietly, because once this starts, all the lessons in the world won't help you. Once this starts, I stop being the bartender, stop being a student. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I become what I was before. What? Jack tried so hard to help me leave behind. And what's that? Holloway asked. Though his face suggested he already knew the answer, Tom's reply was simple, final, death walking. The moment shattered like a mirror hitting stone. The Fisher twins made their break for the back door, just as Tom had predicted. Morgan lunged for the fallen shotgun, his movements telegraphed seconds before he began. And Holloway went for his hidden derringer with snake-like speed. But Tom was faster. He'd been faster 6 years ago, and time hadn't changed that truth. His first shot caught the back door's heavy wooden beam, dropping it into place just as the twins reached it. His second knocked the shotgun another foot away from Morgan's grasping fingers. And his third sent Holloway's derringer spinning through the air in a spray of blood and splinters from the outlaw's vest pocket. All three shots had come so close together they sounded like a single rolling thunderclap. Jesus Christ, one of the twins whispered. That's 3 bullets, Holloway snarled, clutching his bleeding hand. How many you got left, Phantom? Enough, Tom replied simply. More than enough. But Julia, still watching from her position near the front door, saw something the others didn't, a slight tightening around Tom's eyes. He'd fired 3 shots in impossibly quick succession, and even legends had their limits. You're not as fast as you used to be, Holloway taunted, seemingly reading the same signs. The old Phantom would have killed us all by now. Maybe, Tom agreed. Or maybe Jack's lessons went deeper than you think. Thunder crashed outside, as if emphasizing his words. The storm had reached its peak, rain hammering against the windows with renewed fury. In the dim light, shadows danced across the walls like restless spirits. Your reputation, Holloway continued, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone, says you never miss, never waste a bullet. But you just used 3 shots, and we're all still breathing. Wasn't trying to kill you, Tom replied. Not yet. That brought Holloway up short. What? Giving you a chance to see what you're up against, to make the smart choice. Tom's eyes swept the room. All of you, because what happens next, that's on your heads, not mine. The Fisher twins exchanged glances, then slowly raised their hands. We surrender, one of them said. The kid was right. This ain't worth dying over. Cowards, Holloway spat, but Tom was already moving with smooth efficiency. He pulled 2 pairs of handcuffs from behind the bar where they'd hung next to the shotgun all these years and slid them across the floor to the twins. Put them on each other, he ordered. Tight. I'll know if you don't. As the twins complied, Morgan made his move. He'd been inching toward a broken bottle, its jagged edge gleaming in the lamplight, but before he could grasp it, Tom's boot came down on his wrist. 6 years, Tom said softly, applying pressure until Morgan gasped in. Pain. 6 years I watched men like you plan desperate things. Saw it in their eyes, their hands, the way they looked at broken glass or empty bottles. He increased the pressure slightly. Amazing what a man learns tending bar. You're enjoying this, Holloway accused. All that talk about peace, about Jack's lessons. You're loving every minute of being the Phantom again. For the first time, something like doubt flickered across Tom's face. Julia saw it and her heart clenched, because Holloway was right. There was a part of Tom that had awakened, a deadly part that moved with the fluid grace of a predator. Maybe, Tom admitted quietly, maybe that's why Jack made me promise to stop, because he saw what I couldn't, how easy it is to become what you're fighting. Then you're no better than us, Holloway pressed his advantage. Just another killer with a fancy name. No. The word came not from Tom, but from Dr. Morris. The physician looked up from tending Thorpe, his hands bloody but his eyes clear. You're wrong about him, dead wrong, Morris continued. I've watched this man serve drinks to saints and sinners alike for 6 years. Watched him break up fights with words instead of fists, help drunks home instead of letting them freeze, extend credit to families down on their luck. The doctor's voice grew stronger. That's not a killer wearing a bartender mask. That's a good man wearing the Phantom's gun. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with truth. Even Holloway appeared momentarily at a loss. Cuff him, Tom ordered Morgan, tossing another pair of handcuffs toward him. Behind his back. You try anything clever, and I'll show you just how much of the Phantom is still in me. Morgan, his wrist still aching from Tom's boot, complied with shaking hands. The Fisher twins sat quietly in their corner, their own cuffs glinting in the lamplight. You really think this ends with us behind bars? Holloway laughed as the cuffs clicked shut. "The minute word gets out that the Desert Phantom is alive, every gunslinger from here to Texas will come looking for you. Your quiet life, your peace, it's over." "Maybe," Tom agreed. "But right now, all I care about is getting Jack to a doctor. The rest," he shrugged, "the rest is tomorrow's problem." "Then you're a fool," Holloway sneered, "because tomorrow's problems have a way of showing up today." As if on cue, hoofbeats thundered outside the saloon, many hoofbeats, growing louder by the second. Ah, Holloway's smile was terrible to behold, right on time. Tom's expression didn't change, but his grip tightened almost imperceptibly on his gun. "Julia," he called softly, "get Doc and Jack out the back, now." "Tom!" Julia started to protest, but he cut her off. "The rest of Holloway's gang," he said quietly, "the ones who weren't with him in Pine Ridge, the ones I should have known were coming." His eyes met hers. "Get them out, please." The hoofbeats stopped outside. Boot steps approached the saloon doors, accompanied by the jingle of spurs and the metallic click of weapons being readied. "Well, Phantom," Holloway's smile widened, "still think you can read every man's intentions?" "No," Tom replied, moving to stand between the approaching footsteps and his wounded friend. "But I can read yours, and I know what's coming through that door isn't near as dangerous as what's already inside." Lightning flashed once more, and in its brilliant glare, the Desert Phantom's silhouette seemed to grow, spreading across the floor like a promise or a warning. The saloon doors creaked open slowly, deliberately. Through the gap came the gleam of gun barrels, maybe 10 of them. The storm's fury painted everything in shades of shadow and lightning, turning the armed men into looming silhouettes. "Quite a reunion," the lead figure drawled, stepping into the light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from granite and eyes like chips of ice. The famous Desert Phantom, tending bar in a dusty nowhere town. Almost didn't believe it when the boys rode out to tell us. "Harrison Holloway," Tom said quietly. "Still riding with trash, I see." "Still breathing," Harrison corrected, his eyes taking in the scene. His captured brother, the wounded men, the growing pool of blood around Sheriff Thorpe. Which is more than I can say for some folks. More men filed in behind him, spreading out with practiced precision. Julia, still trying to help Dr. Morris move Thorpe, counted 8 guns, all pointed at Tom. "Julia." Tom's voice was soft, but carried an edge of steel. "Get Jack out, now. Nobody's going anywhere," Harrison commanded. His men shifted to block both exits. "Not until we settle some old business." Vincent Holloway, still handcuffed, laughed from his position on the floor. "Told you there'd be complications, Phantom. Harry's been running what's left of the Martinez gang since you killed old Mad Dog." "Silver Canyon," Harrison nodded. "Been a long time since anyone spoke that name, but some debts don't fade with time." Tom's gun hadn't moved, still trained, on Vincent Holloway, but his eyes scanned the room, reading angles, distances, shadows. "Your brother made his choice in Silver Canyon," he said to Harrison, "same as Mad Dog did. He chose his path." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the hatred in Harrison's eyes. "And you chose to gun him down, shot him in the back while he was running." "No." Tom's denial was flat, absolute. "I shot him in the front while he was drawing on a woman and her child. I saw his eyes when he died. He knew what he was doing, just like you know what you're doing now." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Dr. Morris had managed to get Thorpe into a sitting position against the wall, but the sheriff's breathing was labored. 8 guns, Harrison said softly. 8 experienced killers against unwashed-up legend playing bartender. How do you like those odds, Phantom? "Better than you'd think." Tom's voice remained steady. "Because I've been watching your men since they walked in. The one by the window, he's favoring his right leg. Old injury probably slows his draw. The two by the bar are standing too close together. They'll get in each other's way. The one behind you is scared, his gun hands shaking so bad he's likely to shoot one of his own. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "You always talk too much." "Part of being a bartender," Tom replied. "You learn to read people, learn their habits, their fears, like how your left eye twitches when you're about to draw, just like it did in Silver Canyon, just before your brother died." The words hit Harrison like physical blows. His face contorted with rage. "Kill him!" he roared. "Kill him now!" What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, yet was over in seconds. Tom moved like liquid shadow, his gun barking 3 times before anyone could react. The first shot took out the lamp above Harrison's head, plunging half the room into darkness. The second caught the floorboard at the feet of the 2 men by the bar, sending them stumbling into each other. The third hit the window behind the injured gunman, making him duck instinctively. In the confusion, Tom rolled behind and overturned. Table as guns blazed. Bullets splintered wood and shattered bottles, filling the air with the smell of gunpowder and spilled whiskey. "Get Jack out!" Tom shouted to Julia over the chaos. "Doc, go with him!" Julia and Morris half-carried, half-dragged Thorpe toward the back door as Harrison's men tried to adjust to the darkness. "Spread out," Harrison commanded. "He's just one man." "One man who knows this room better than he knows himself." Tom's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. One man who spent 6 years memorizing every creak in these floorboards, every shadow cast by these lamps, every angle bullets can travel. A shot rang out, and one of Harrison's men screamed, his gun hand suddenly useless. "One man," Tom continued, "who's had 6 years to prepare for exactly this kind of night." Another shot, another cry of pain. Harrison's men were shooting at shadows now, at movements glimpsed in lightning flashes, at the ghost of a legend who seemed to be everywhere at once. "You're just proving what I always said," Harrison shouted into the darkness. "You're a killer, phantom, a cold-blooded murderer hiding behind fancy words and a bartender's apron." "No," Tom's voice was closer now. "I'm what Jack taught me to be. A man who chooses his battles. And right now, I'm choosing to give your men a chance to walk away." One of Harrison's gunmen suddenly bolted for the door, then another. In the storm's flickering light, their fear was plain to see. "Cowards!" Harrison roared. "Stand and fight!" "They're not cowards," Tom said quietly. "They're smart. They figured out what you haven't, that there's a difference between being willing to kill and being willing to die." Only 3 of Harrison's men remained now, plus Harrison himself. Vincent Holloway watched it all with a mixture of fury and fascination, his earlier bravado replaced by something like awe. "Come on, Phantom," Harrison challenged, spinning in place, trying to locate his target. "Face me like a man, or are you just going to hide in the dark, like the coward who shot my brother?" "I didn't hide then," Tom's voice came from directly behind him, "and I'm not hiding now." Harrison whirled, his gun coming up, but he was far too late. The Desert Phantom stood less than 3 feet away, his weapon already leveled. "Your brother died trying to murder innocents," Tom said softly. "Is that really the legacy you want to die for?" Lightning flashed one final time, illuminating them both in stark relief. Harrison with hatred twisting his features. Tom with the calm certainty of a man who had made peace with violence long ago. And in the frozen moment, Harrison's left eye twitched. The shot came not from Harrison but from behind. One of his remaining men had circled around in the chaos. Tom felt the bullet tear through his left shoulder, spinning him sideways. His own shot at Harrison went wide, shattering a mirror behind the bar. "Not so legendary now, are you?" Harrison laughed, regaining his confidence as Tom stumbled against a table. The great Desert Phantom, bleeding like any other man. Tom's gun hand stayed steady, but blood darkened his shirt at an alarming rate. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was bad enough to matter, to slow him down, to make him human. "Julia," he shouted, hearing movement near the back door. "I told you to get out." "Not without you," she called back, and he heard the distinctive sound of her rifle being cocked. "Don't," he warned, but it was too late. Julia's shot caught one of Harrison's remaining men in the leg, dropping him, but the muzzle flash gave away her position, and Harrison's other man was already turning, his gun rising. Tom didn't hesitate. He threw himself across the room, his injured shoulder screaming in protest, and tackled Julia as the outlaw's bullet whistled through the space where she had been. They crashed behind the bar together as bottles exploded overhead. "Touching." Harrison's voice dripped with mockery. "The Phantom does have a heart after all. Makes me wonder." A pause, then, "Bring the sheriff back in here." Tom's blood ran cold as he heard the sounds of struggle. One of Harrison's men must have circled around outside. He had Dr. Morris at gunpoint, forcing him and Thorpe back through the door. "Let them go," Tom called out, his voice steady despite the pain. "This is between us." "No," Harrison replied. "This is about family, about watching the ones you love die, just like I had to watch my brother die. The great desert phantom, brought low by the same weakness that retired him in the first place. You care too much." Julia tried to rise, but Tom held her down as more bullets splintered the bar above them. "Stay still," he whispered. "Please." "You can't save them all, Phantom," Harrison shouted. "Just like you couldn't save that woman in Silver Canyon. What was her name? Maria?" The name hit Tom like a physical blow. 6 years of peace, of trying to forget, crashed down around him. He saw Maria's face, heard her last words, felt her, blood on his hands all over again. "That's right." Harrison pressed his advantage. "The boys told me all about her, how you tried to leave this life behind for her, how Martinez's gang found you anyway, how you weren't fast enough to save her." "Don't," Tom's voice was barely a whisper. "And now history repeats itself." Harrison's boots creaked on the floorboards as he moved closer. "The sheriff who tried to save your soul, the woman who gave you a chance at a new life, the doctor who kept your secrets. Which one should die?" "The first?" Julia's hand found Tom's in the darkness behind the bar. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you gave us 6 years of peace. That's worth something." But Tom barely heard her. His mind was racing backward through time to that night in Silver Canyon when it had all gone wrong, when he'd been too confident, too sure of himself, too convinced that his reputation would keep Maria safe. "I can't," he started, his voice cracking. "Can't what?" Harrison taunted. "Can't save them, can't bear to watch them die, or can't admit that everything Jack taught you about peace was a lie." The storm outside had begun to fade, the thunder growing more distant. In the relative quiet, Tom could hear Thorpe's labored breathing, Dr. Morris's attempts to keep him steady, Julia's heart pounding next to him. "You know what your problem is, Phantom," Harrison continued. "You never understood what this life really means. It's not about being the fastest or the deadliest. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes, to sacrifice anyone and anything to win." Tom closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his gun, the burn of his wound, the tremor in his hands that came not from fear, but from something deeper. The knowledge that whatever he did next would define him forever. "You're right," he said. Finally, his voice carrying clearly through the smoky air. "I do care too much, always have. That's what Jack saw in me all those years ago. Not just a fast gun, but a man who could feel the weight of every trigger pull, every life taken." "Philosophy won't save them," Harrison sneered. "No," Tom agreed, "but it might save you." He raised his voice. "All of you listen carefully. In about 10 seconds, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to drop my gun. And then you're going to have a choice. The only choice," Harrison laughed, "is which one dies first." "Wrong." Tom's voice had changed, becoming something ancient and terrible. The choice is whether you want to be the men who killed an injured sheriff, a doctor trying to save lives, and an innocent woman, or the men who walked away and lived to tell about it. You're in no position to make threats, Harrison said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. Not a threat, Tom replied, a prophecy. Because if you harm any of them, if you spill one more drop of innocent blood in this saloon, he took a deep breath, then the desert phantom stops trying to save your lives and goes back to what he does best. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wounded had stopped their moaning, sensing something momentous about to unfold. You're bluffing, Harrison said finally, but his voice shook slightly. Am I? Tom asked softly. You've heard the stories. You know what I was, what I can be again. So ask yourself, do you really want to force that choice? Do you want to be the one who brings death back to life? Julia felt him shifting beside her, preparing to rise. Tom, she whispered, don't. But he was already standing, his gun held loosely at his side. Blood dripped steadily from his wounded shoulder, but his eyes were what held everyone transfixed. They were no longer the eyes of a bartender or even of a legendary gunfighter. They were the eyes of a man looking into an abyss and choosing to step forward anyway. Time seemed to crystallize in the smoke-filled saloon. Tom stood exposed, his gun pointed at the floor, blood darkening his left sleeve. Harrison and his remaining men held their positions, weapons trained on their various hostages. Even the storm outside had hushed, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Drop the gun, Harrison ordered, but his voice trembled slightly. Tom's weapon hit the floor with a sound like distant thunder. The clatter echoed through the room, emphasized by the absolute silence that followed. There, Tom said quietly. Now you have what you wanted. The desert phantom, unarmed and bleeding. His eyes found Harrison's across the room. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Kill him! Vincent Holloway called from his position on the floor, still handcuffed. Kill him now before he tries something! But Harrison hesitated, and in that hesitation Tom saw something he recognized, the same doubt he'd felt in Silver Canyon, the moment before everything changed. Your brother had that same look, Tom said softly, right before he made his choice, right before he decided that killing was easier than living with doubt. Shut up! Harrison's gun wavered slightly. You don't get to talk about him. I remember every man I've killed, Tom continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Every face, every moment. Your brother's eyes were green, like your mother's. He told me that right before he drew, said it was the only good. A thing he got from her. Harrison's face went pale. How did you? Because I listened, Tom replied simply. That's what Jack taught me. That every man, even the ones you have to kill, deserves to be heard, to be remembered. Boss, one of Harrison's remaining men called nervously. Something ain't right here. 6 years, Tom went on, taking a small step forward. 6 years I've poured drinks and listened to stories, learned that every man who walks through those doors is carrying something. Pain, fear, regret. Another step. Even you, Harrison, especially you. Stay back. Harrison's gun tracked Tom's movement, but his hand was shaking now. You know what I learned most of all. Tom's voice dropped lower, becoming almost gentle. I learned that the man who needs everyone to fear him is usually the most frightened of all. At that moment, several things happened at once. Dr. Morris, seeing Harrison's attention fixed on Tom, shifted his weight to shield the wounded Thorpe. Julia's hand found the butt of her fallen rifle beneath the bar. And the last of Harrison's loyal men began backing toward the door. Now! Harrison shouted, but his men didn't move. They had seen something in Tom's eyes that scared them more than their leader's wrath. They're not going to shoot, Tom said with quiet certainty, because they finally understand what Jack taught me years ago, that there's a difference between being a killer and being a murderer. They'll shoot if I tell them to shoot, Harrison's Voice rose to a desperate pitch. "No," Tom shook his head slowly. "They won't, because they can feel it. What's coming? What happens if they cross that line?" He took another step forward. "You feel it too, don't you, Harrison? That voice in your head telling you this isn't what your brother would have wanted." "You don't know what he wanted." Harrison's finger tightened on the trigger. "He forced my hand," Tom corrected gently. "Just like you're trying to force it now. But ask yourself, is this really about your brother? Or is it about you, trying to live up to a legacy of violence that never brought anyone peace?" Harrison's gun barrel dipped slightly. Uncertainty, warring with rage on his face. Behind him, his last two men exchanged glances and began moving slowly toward the exit. "You can still walk away," Tom continued, close enough now that Harrison's gun nearly touched his chest. "Can still choose a different path. That's what Jack taught me, that it's never too late to change." "Boss!" one of the remaining outlaws called from the doorway. "We're leaving. This ain't worth dying for." "Cowards!" Harrison's shout was ragged. "All of you! The great desert phantom is right in front of us, unarmed, and you're running." "No!" Tom's voice was barely a whisper. "No, they're not running. They're living, something your brother never got the chance to learn." Harrison's gun pressed against Tom's chest, right over his heart. "I could kill you right now, end the legend once and for all." "Could," Tom agreed, "but you won't. Because you finally figured out what I learned 6 years ago, that pulling a trigger is easy. Living with it afterward, that's the hard part." For a long moment, the only sound was the fading storm and Harrison's ragged breathing. Then, slowly, incredibly, his gun barrel began to lower. "What are you doing?" Vincent demanded from the floor. "Kill him! Kill all of them!" But Harrison wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were fixed on Tom's, seeing perhaps for the first time what his brother had seen in those final moments. Not a legend, not a killer, but a man who carried the weight of every life he'd taken. "My brother," Harrison said heavily. "He really did draw first." "Yes," Tom replied softly, "and his last words were about you, about hoping you'd choose a better path." The gun slipped from Harrison's fingers, hitting the floor with a finality that seemed to echo through the years. Behind him, his last men melted away into the night, leaving only the sound of distant hoofbeats. "It's over," Tom said quietly, not just to Harrison, but to everyone in the room. "The killing stops here." Julia emerged from behind the bar, her rifle trained on Harrison, but her eyes on Tom. Dr. Morris resumed tending to Thorpe, whose breathing had steadied. And outside, the storm finally broke, moonlight streaming through the windows to paint silver, and baths across the bullet-scarred floor. Harrison sank to his knees, years of hatred and vengeance draining from him like blood from a wound. What happens now?" Tom's reply was interrupted by a weak voice from the corner. "Now," Sheriff Thorpe said, struggling to sit up, "we all learn to live with our choices, just like I taught him to do all those years ago." The Desert Phantom looked at his old friend, then at the woman who had given him a chance at a new life, then finally at the man who had come to kill him but found redemption instead. "No," he corrected gently. "Now we learn to live with our choices, together." Dawn broke over Copper Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise. The Golden Spur Saloon bore the scars of the night's violence. Bullet holes in the walls, broken glass glinting on the floor, bloodstains that would never quite wash away, but it still stood, much like the man who had defended it. Tom worked methodically behind the bar, his left arm in a sling, cleaning glasses just as he had done every morning for the past 6 years. The routine was the same, but something had changed, not just in him, but in the very air of the place. "You don't have to do that now," Julia said softly, watching him from the doorway. "Dr. Morris said you need rest." "Rest can wait," Tom replied, not looking up. Some things need to be put right first. Through the window, they could see Sheriff Thorpe being tended to in Dr. Morris's office across the street. The lawman would live, though he'd carry another scar to add to his collection. In the jail next door, Harrison and his surviving men sat quietly in their cells, their fighting spirits broken, not by violence, but by understanding. Words already spreading, Julia continued, moving to help him despite his protests. About what happened here, about who you really are. Who I was, Tom corrected gently. The desert phantom died last night, along with a lot of old ghosts. Did he? Julia's voice carried a hint of doubt. Those men who ran, they'll talk. More will come, looking to make a name for themselves. Tom finally stopped his work, looking at her directly. Let them come. They'll find what those before them found. Just a bartender who listens more than he shoots. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, the new lines around his eyes. He looked both older and younger somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted even as a new one settled in its place. You're really going to stay? Julia asked, hope warring with concern in her voice. Even after all this? 6 years ago, Tom said slowly, Jack Thorpe found me in Silver Canyon, drowning in guilt and whiskey after Maria's death. He could have drawn on me, tried to bring in what was left of the desert phantom. Instead, he sat down and ordered a drink, talked to me about peace, about choices, about the difference between living and just surviving. He touched the scar on his shoulder, still fresh and painful. Last night, I finally understood what he was trying to teach me. It's not about the difference between living and just surviving. He touched the scar on his shoulder, still fresh and painful. Last night, I finally understood what he was trying to teach me. It's not about hanging up your guns or pretending the past never happened. It's about choosing who you want to be every single day. The door creaked open, and old Hank shuffled in, right on time for his morning drink. He paused, taking in the destruction, then smiled toothlessly. Heard there was some excitement last night, he said, settling onto his usual stool. Sorry I missed it. Tom's lips twitched in what might have been a smile as he poured the old man his usual. Some things, at least, hadn't changed. Town's already talking about rebuilding, Julia said, watching Hank take his first sip. Sheriff Thorpe says he'll recommend a commendation for how you handled things without killing anyone. Jack always did believe in redemption, Tom nodded. Even for men like Harrison. Maybe especially for men like Harrison. Through the window, they could see people beginning to emerge from their homes, life returning to Copper Creek. Children played in the street, women hung laundry, men nodded respectfully as they passed the saloon. But there was something different in how they looked at the Golden Spur now. Not fear, exactly, but awareness, understanding. You know, Julia said thoughtfully, I always wondered why you chose this place. Why here, of all the towns you could have disappeared to? Tom was quiet for a long moment, his hands moving automatically through their familiar routine. Because it was quiet, he said finally. Because it needed someone to tend the bar and listen to stories. Because, he paused, looking around at the bullet-scarred walls, the broken bottles, the first rays of sun painting everything in new light. Because some places, like some people, deserve a second chance. The door opened again, and Dr. Morris entered looking exhausted but satisfied. Sheriff's going to make it, he announced. Says he wants to talk to you, Tom, about the future. Future's right here, Tom replied, gesturing to the saloon around them. Always was. As if to emphasize his point, he reached up and removed the shotgun from its hiding place behind the bar. Everyone watched as he unloaded it, then placed it carefully in a box with his gun belt. Won't you need those? Julia asked softly. If others come looking for the phantom. No, Tom shook his head. Because they won't find him. They'll find what Harrison and his men found, something a lot more dangerous than a fast gun. And, "What's that?" Dr. Morris asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. "A man at peace with his past," Tom replied, returning to his endless task of polishing glasses. "A man who learned that the hardest battles are won with words instead of bullets. A man who finally understood what Jack was trying to teach him all along." "Which is?" Julia pressed. Tom looked up, and in his eyes they saw not the deadly gunfighter of legend, not the quiet bartender of the past 6 years, but something new, something that combined the strength of one with the wisdom of the other. "That true courage isn't about being faster than the other man's bullet," he said softly. "It's about being strong enough to offer him a drink instead." Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of night. Copper Creek stirred, to life around them, forever changed, but somehow stronger for it. And in the Golden Spur Saloon, a bartender who had once been a legend continued his work, one glass at a time, at peace with who he had been and who he had chosen to become. The desert phantom was gone, but something better had taken his place. A man who had learned that the greatest victories are won not with a gun, but with understanding. A man who had finally found his true calling, not in dealing death, but in pouring hope, one drink at a time, in a dusty saloon where legends could rest and ordinary men could find redemption. The tale of Tom Ryder, once the desert phantom, now simply a bartender at the Golden Spur Saloon, spread through the territory like wildfire. Some dismissed it as frontier fancy, but those who had seen the events at Copper Creek knew better. They had witnessed a legend transformed, not diminished. 3 weeks after the Holloway gang's fateful encounter, the saloon had been mostly repaired. New glass in the windows caught the afternoon sun, casting prisms across freshly scrubbed floors. The bullet holes in the walls remained, however. Tom had insisted on that. "Some reminders are worth keeping," he'd told Julia when she suggested patching them. Sheriff Thorpe was back on his feet, moving slower but perhaps with more purpose than before. His brush with death had changed him too, made him more reflective. He visited the saloon daily now, not just to check on things, but to continue the conversations he and Tom had started years ago in Silver Canyon. "Got a letter from the territorial marshal today," Thorpe announced, settling at the bar on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. He slid an official-looking document across to Tom. "Seems word of what happened here reached all the way to the governor's office." Tom dried his hands on a towel before picking up the letter. His eyes scanned it quickly, then he passed it to Julia without comment. She read it aloud for the benefit of Dr. Morris and Rebecca, who had both come to regard the saloon as something of a second home since that night. "In recognition of extraordinary bravery and judgment in the apprehension of the Holloway gang, Thomas Ryder is hereby offered a position as Special Deputy Marshal for the Arizona Territory." Julia looked up, surprised. "Tom, this is quite an honor." "It's a misunderstanding," Tom replied quietly, returning to his glasses. "They're not offering it to me, they're offering it to the Desert Phantom." Thorpe shook his head. "No, Tom. They're offering it to the man who took down 2 dangerous gangs without firing a fatal shot. The man who chose words over bullets when it counted most. That's not the Phantom, that's you." "Still wearing a gun, though," Dr. Morris observed, nodding toward the Colt that now rode openly on Tom's hip. No longer hidden, but no longer the center of his identity either. "Thought you were done with that life." "A tool's just a tool," Tom said softly. "It's the hand that holds it that matters." The doors swung open, admitting a young man dressed in the dust of hard travel. He couldn't have been more than 20, with a fresh face that hadn't yet learned the lines of hardship. His eyes swept the room nervously before settling on Tom. "They said I'd find him here," the stranger blurted. "The Desert Phantom. That true?" A hush fell over the saloon. Julia's hand drifted toward the shotgun she now kept behind the bar, but Tom gave a slight shake of his head. "And if it was?" Tom asked, his voice measured as he continued wiping. "A glass." What business would you have with such a man? The young man swallowed hard. My name's Ethan Miller. My pa was William Miller. He rode with you once in the old days, before Silver Canyon. Tom's hands stilled. Bill Miller, he said, softly. Good man with horses, better man with a deck of cards. His eyes took on a faraway look. I heard he settled down somewhere north, started a ranch. He did, Ethan nodded eagerly. Talked about you sometimes. Said you were the only honest man he ever rode with. Said you saved his life once, told him to go make something of himself. Your father saved his own life by choosing a different path, Tom corrected gently. Best decision he ever made, seems like. He died last month, Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. Pneumonia. But before he went, he asked me to find you. Said you might need help, what with word spreading about Copper Creek and all. Tom studied the young man carefully. Help with what, exactly? Just help. Pa said men would come looking for your reputation, not understanding that the man who earned it isn't the same as the one who carries it now. Said someone ought to watch your back. A small smile touched the corner of Tom's mouth. Your father was always looking ahead to the next play. He gestured to the bar. Sit down, son. First drinks on the house for Bill's memory. As Ethan took a seat, Sheriff Thorpe exchanged a look with Tom. They both knew what was happening. The past was reaching forward again, but this time bringing not vengeance, but something like grace. Word of the Desert Phantom's reappearance continued to spread throughout the territory, drawing others to Copper Creek in its wake. Some came seeking the legend, looking to test themselves against the man whose name had once been whispered around campfires. Others came out of curiosity, wanting to see for themselves if the stories were true. But all found the same thing. A quiet bartender who listened more than he spoke, whose hands moved with practiced efficiency as he poured drinks and offered the occasional word of advice. And if those hands sometimes strayed to the gun at his hip when trouble walked through the door, well, that was just prudence in a frontier town. What most visitors didn't see was how the town had rallied around Tom, how Julia had taken to keeping a loaded shotgun within easy reach, how Sheriff Thorpe's deputies had developed a rotation that always kept at least one of them within shouting distance of the Golden Spur, how Dr. Morris had stocked extra medical supplies just in case, how Rebecca had learned to read the room and alter her songs to either soothe or warn, depending on the mood. Copper Creek had claimed Tom Ryder as its own, phantom and all. 5 weeks after the showdown, a group of riders approached from the east. 7 men, moving with the coordinated precision that spoke of military training or something less savory. They dismounted at the hitching post outside the saloon, dust from the trail coating their clothes and weapons. Julia spotted them first. Tom, she called softly from the window. Riders. He nodded, not breaking stride as he served drinks to a table of miners. Only the slight shift in his posture revealed his awareness. Weight balanced evenly on the balls of his feet, right hand free, eyes constantly scanning. The newcomers pushed through the batwing doors as one, spreading out in a practiced formation that immediately set the room on edge. Their leader, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest, stepped forward. I'm looking for Thomas Ryder, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Tom set down his tray and turned slowly. You found him. The man's eyes narrowed. I'm Deputy Marshal Nathaniel Hayes. These are my men. He reached inside his coat, causing several hands to drop to weapons, but produced only a folded document. Got orders to bring you to Prescott. On what charge? Sheriff Thorpe demanded, rising from his table in the corner. No charge, Hayes clarified. Governor wants to meet the man who took down the Holloway gang and Harrison's bunch without adding to the body count. Says he's got a proposition for you. Tom's expression didn't change. Already received the governor's proposition. Gave my answer, which was, Hayes raised an eyebrow. My place is here. The deputy marshal looked around the saloon, at the bullet holes still visible in the walls, at the wary faces of the patrons, at the protective stance Julia had taken behind the bar. Something in his demeanor softened. "Look, Ryder, I know about your history, about Silver Canyon and Maria Delgado, about what happened here a few weeks back. The governor doesn't want the desert phantom. He wants the man who found a better way." Tom's eyes flicked to Thorpe, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. 3 days, Tom said finally. "I'll give the governor 3 days of my time. Then I'm coming back here regardless of what he has to say." Hayes nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Fair enough. We leave at dawn." As the deputy marshal's men filed out to secure lodging for the night, Hayes lingered. "For what it's worth, Ryder, I was at Silver Canyon, arrived with the posse after it was all over." Tom went very still. "You saw Maria?" "I did," Hayes said quietly. "Helped bury her proper. Prayer and all, like she would have wanted." Tom's hand tightened on the glass he was holding, the only outward sign of the emotions churning beneath his calm exterior. "Thank you for that." Hayes nodded once more, then followed his men out. "You're not really going, are you?" Julia asked once they were alone. "Have to," Tom replied simply. "Some ghosts need facing." The journey to Prescott took 2 days of hard riding. Tom spoke little, content to observe Hayes and his men, noting how they operated together, how they maintained their weapons, how they scanned the horizon for potential threats. They were professionals, not gunslingers, men who carried their authority in their bearing rather than their holsters. Prescott greeted them with the bustle of a growing territorial capital. Brick buildings lined the main street, a sharp contrast to Copper Creek's weathered wooden structures. People hurried about their business, paying little attention to the dust-covered riders, a luxury of larger settlements where strangers were commonplace. The governor's office occupied the upper floor of the Territorial Administration Building, a grand structure by frontier standards. Tom was led up a wide staircase and through a door bearing the seal of the Arizona Territory. Governor Edmund Stanton was not what Tom had expected. A small man with intelligent eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, he rose from behind his desk with a quickness that belied his age. "Mr. Ryder," he greeted, extending his hand. "Or do you prefer Desert Phantom?" "Just Tom will do," he replied, shaking the offered hand briefly. "Please, sit." Stanton gestured to a chair before retaking his own seat. He studied Tom openly for a moment. "You're not what I pictured either." "And what did you picture, Governor?" "Someone more formidable, I suppose." The reports from Copper Creek painted quite a picture. "Reports tend to exaggerate," Tom said evenly. Stanton smiled. "Do they? 7 men wounded, not 1 killed. The Holloway gang and what was left of Martinez's outfit. 2 of the most dangerous. Groups in the territory, all captured alive. A town saved with minimal bloodshed. If anything, Mr. Ryder, I suspect the reports understated what happened." Tom remained silent, waiting. "I'll be direct," Stanton continued. "The territory is changing. The railroad's coming. Settlements are growing. The old ways, the 6-gun and the vigilante, they're becoming liabilities rather than necessities. I'm familiar with change, Governor." "Yes, I believe you are." Stanton leaned forward. "That's precisely why I need you. Not as a gunfighter, but as someone who understands both worlds. Someone who can bridge the gap between what we were and what we're becoming." "You have marshals for that," Tom pointed out. "Good men, from what I've seen." "Men like Hayes?" "Yes, they're effective enforcers of the law, but they lack something essential, something you demonstrated in Copper Creek." "And what's that?" "The wisdom to know when not to draw," Stanton said simply. "When to use words instead of bullets, when to offer redemption instead of judgment." He stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the town below. "We're at a crossroads, Mr. Ryder. The territory will either grow into something worthy of statehood, or it will remain a lawless frontier. I believe men like you, men who have seen both the cost of violence and the power of restraint, are key to that transition. Tom was silent for a long moment. What exactly are you asking of me, Governor? I want you to train a specialized group of peace officers, men who will serve not just as enforcers, but as mediators, who will bring justice without unnecessary bloodshed, who will embody the principles you demonstrated in Copper Creek. I'm a bartender, not a teacher. Are you? Stanton turned back to face him. From what I hear, you've been teaching lessons to everyone who walks into your saloon for the past 6 years. Sheriff Thorpe speaks quite highly of your influence on him. Tom's surprise must have shown on his face because Stanton smiled. Yes, I've corresponded with Sheriff Thorpe at length. He thinks quite highly of you. Says you saved not just his life but his soul. Those are powerful words from a lawman. Outside the window, the sounds of construction echoed through the streets. Hammers on nails, saws through lumber, the creaking of wagon wheels bringing materials for new buildings. The sound of progress, of change. I need 3 weeks of your time, Stanton continued, just to help establish the program. After that, if you wish to return to your saloon, I won't stop you. But I believe once you see what we're building here, you might choose to be part of it. Tom stood, moving to join Stanton at the window. Below them, a group of children ran laughing through the street, chased by a playful dog. A woman hung laundry. On a line stretched between buildings, a shopkeeper swept his storefront. Ordinary lives, Stanton said softly, following Tom's gaze. People who want nothing more than to build homes, raise families, pursue happiness without fear. That's what we're protecting, Mr. Ryder. Not gold shipments or stage lines or banks, though those matter too, but this, the simple dream of peace. Tom thought of Copper Creek, of Julia and the Golden Spur, of Sheriff Thorpe and Dr. Morris, of old Hank and his morning whiskey, of the life he had built there, one quiet day at a time. 3 weeks, he said finally. No promises beyond that. Stanton nodded, satisfaction evident in his eyes. That's all I ask. The program began 2 days later in a converted warehouse on the edge of town. 20 men had been selected from across the territory, former soldiers, sheriffs, trackers, and even a few reformed outlaws. All had demonstrated not just skill with weapons, but judgment in their use. Tom stood before them, uncomfortable with the role, but determined to honor his commitment. He wore no badge, carried his gun as always, and dressed in the simple clothes of a working man rather than any uniform. You all know why you're here, he began, his quiet voice somehow carrying to every corner of the large space. Governor Stanton has a vision for a new kind of peace officer, one who solves problems with his head first, his heart second, and his gun last. He moved among them, studying faces, reading postures and expressions. Some showed skepticism, others curiosity. A few displayed the hungry look of men seeking to prove themselves. First lesson, Tom continued, put your guns on the table. Hands moved to holsters, hesitated. Now, Tom added, with just enough edge in his voice to confirm he wasn't to be tested. One by one, 20 guns clattered onto the wooden table at the center of the room. Tom looked each man in the eye as they surrendered their weapons. Good. Now who here feels naked? Vulnerable? Less of a man? Several shifted uncomfortably. A few nodded. That feeling, Tom said quietly, is your first obstacle. Because as long as your worth is tied to your gun, you'll never become what the territory needs. With all respect, one of the men spoke up, what the territory needs is law and order. That requires force sometimes. Sometimes, Tom agreed, but far less often than most men with badges believe. He gestured to the table of weapons. Each of these can end a life in an instant. That power isn't to be carried lightly or used easily. The desert phantom giving lessons on restraint, another man scoffed. Bit rich, isn't it? Tom fixed him with a steady gaze. Who better to teach the cost of violence than a man who's paid it? Who better to show the value of words over bullets than someone who's used both? For the next 3 hours, Tom walked them through scenarios, conflicts that could be resolved with or without weapons, situations where judgment mattered more than speed. He had them role-play difficult encounters, critiquing their approaches, challenging their assumptions. By midday, even the skeptics were engaged, drawn in by Tom's quiet authority and practical wisdom. They broke for a meal, the men clustering in small groups, discussing what they'd learned. Hayes appeared at Tom's side as he stood apart, observing. "You're a natural teacher," the deputy marshal remarked. "They respect you." "They respect the legend," Tom corrected. "The Phantom's shadow is doing the teaching." "Don't sell yourself short, Ryder. I've trained men before, seen good instructors and bad. What you're doing here, connecting their actions to consequences, making them think beyond the immediate confrontation, that's rare." Tom shrugged. "Just passing on what Jack Thorpe taught me and what I learned the hard way when I didn't listen." Hayes studied him thoughtfully. "You really believe in this, don't you? This idea that the territory can change, become something better?" "I believe people can change," Tom replied. "Seen it happen. Harrison Holloway's working as the jail caretaker in Copper Creek now. Did you know that? Man who came to kill me is keeping the cells clean for Sheriff Thorpe." "And that's enough? Redemption for a killer?" Tom's eyes took on that distant look. Again, seeing beyond the warehouse to memories only he could access. "It's a start. We're all just looking for a way back from whatever darkness claimed us. Some find it in a badge, some in a cell. I found mine behind a bar. And now," Hayes pressed, "what are you finding here, Ryder?" Tom considered the question, watching the men as they prepared to return to training. Their faces were more thoughtful now, their discussions less about guns and more about approaches, alternatives, outcomes. "Maybe something I didn't know I was looking for," he admitted. "A way to make what happened in Copper Creek mean something beyond one night in one town." The 3 weeks passed quickly. Tom's days were filled with training the new peace officers, his evenings with meetings at the governor's office, discussing progress and refining the program. He wrote daily letters to Julia and Sheriff Thorpe, keeping them informed of his activities and his intentions to return as promised. But as the final days approached, Tom found himself torn in a way he hadn't expected. The work was meaningful, the impact potentially far-reaching. Governor Stanton had expanded the program based on its early success, bringing in more recruits from further afield. "You've created something remarkable here," Stanton told him on what was supposed to be their final meeting. "These men speak of you with reverence, not because you're the Desert Phantom, but because you've shown them a different path." "They did the hard part," Tom demurred, "choosing to see beyond the way things have always been done." "Perhaps." Stanton cleared his throat. "I know our agreement was for 3 weeks. You've honored that commitment fully. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, would you consider staying? Taking a permanent role in the program?" Tom had been expecting the question, yet still found himself without a ready answer. "I made promises to people in Copper Creek." "I understand that. But think of the good you could do here, the lives you could save. Not just directly, but through the men you're training, the legacy you could leave." "Legacy?" Tom repeated softly. "Spent most of my life trying to outrun that word." "Then perhaps it's time to embrace it, to shape it into something you can be proud of." That night, Tom stood on the balcony of his rented room, looking out over Prescott. Lanterns illuminated the streets below, casting pools of light where people still moved about their evening business. Music drifted from a nearby establishment, laughter punctuating the melody. In his hand, He held Julia's latest letter, delivered that afternoon. The words were simple but carried a weight he couldn't ignore. "The saloon is quiet without you," she had written. "The glasses stay polished, the whiskey flows, and Rebecca still sings every night. But something's missing. The heart of the place walked out with you that morning. Copper Creek needs its bartender back. I need my friend back. But if you've found your true calling there in Prescott, we'll understand. Some men are meant for more than one small town can offer." Tom folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket. His thoughts drifted to the Golden Spur, to the rhythm of the days there, to the faces he had come to know, to the peace he had found behind that scarred oak bar. Then he thought of the men he had been training, of the difference they could make across the territory, of the vision Stanton had shared, a vision that, he had to admit, resonated with something deep inside him. Dawn found him at the telegraph office, sending a message to Copper Creek. By mid-morning, he was in the governor's office. "I'll stay," he told Stanton without preamble, "but on my terms." The governor gestured for him to continue. "I'll oversee the training program, help develop its approach and methods, but I won't wear a badge, won't carry territorial authority. I need to be free to speak truth to power, including yours, and I'll need to return to Copper Creek regularly. That town gave me a home when I needed one most. I won't abandon it." Stanton considered the conditions. "That seems reasonable, though I'd hoped you might consider a more official position." "Official positions come with official constraints," Tom replied. "What makes me valuable to your program is that I see things differently. Let's keep it that way." "Very well." Stanton extended his hand. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Ryder, or should I say Professor?" Tom grimaced at the title. Just Tom. Always has been, always will be. 2 days later, the stagecoach to Copper Creek carried an unusual passenger. Tom sat quietly as the coach rocked along the rutted road, watching the landscape roll past. His mind was filled with what lay ahead. Difficult conversations, new arrangements, changed relationships. Change, it seemed, was not something that happened once and was done. It continued, sometimes in directions one never anticipated. What had begun as a bartender defending his saloon had somehow grown into something much larger, a chance to help shape the territory's future while honoring its past. The coach crested a hill, and suddenly Copper Creek lay before them, nestled in its valley. The afternoon sun caught the windows of the Golden Spur, making them flash like signal mirrors. Tom felt something tighten in his chest, not the phantoms. Old battle readiness, but something warmer, more human. "Home," he said softly to himself as the coach began its descent into town. The stage rolled to a stop outside the hotel, dust billowing around the wheels. As Tom stepped down, he saw them waiting. Julia, Sheriff Thorpe, Dr. Morris, Rebecca, Old Hank, and young Ethan Miller. Faces that had become as familiar to him as his own reflection. "Wasn't sure you'd come back," Julia said, stepping forward. "Made a promise," Tom replied simply. "Your telegram said you had news," Thorpe observed. "Good or bad?" Tom looked around at the town, at the place that had sheltered him, accepted him, given him purpose when he needed it most. "Neither," he said finally. "Just different. But I'd rather discuss it over a drink." He nodded toward the Golden Spur. "I hear the bartender just got back to town." As they walked toward the saloon, Tom felt the weight of his gun at his hip, no longer a burden of his past, but a reminder of the responsibility he carried. The Desert Phantom would always be part of him, just as Silver Canyon and Maria would always live in his memory. But now those pieces of his history served a purpose beyond mere survival or redemption. They pushed through the batwing doors of the Golden Spur, and Tom felt the familiar embrace of the place, the smell of whiskey and wood polish, the quality of light through the windows, the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath his boots. Different from Prescott's grand buildings, and political ambitions, but no less important, no less worthy of protection. He moved behind the bar with practiced ease, his hands finding their places among the bottles and glasses. The others took their usual seats, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and relief. "So," Julia prompted as he poured drinks all around, "tell us about Prescott, about the governor's offer." Tom served the last glass, then looked up at the faces watching him, people who had become more than customers or even friends. They had become family. "The governor wants me to help train a new kind of lawman," he said. "Men who'll use their heads and hearts before their guns, who'll bring justice without unnecessary bloodshed." He paused. "I've agreed to take on the role." A moment of silence greeted his words. Then Thorpe spoke up. "So you're leaving us after all?" "No," Tom shook his head. "That's not how it's going to work." He picked up a cloth and began polishing a glass, the familiar motion centering him as he explained his arrangement with Stanton, his intent to divide his time between Prescott and Copper Creek, his vision for bringing the lessons of the Golden Spur to a wider audience. As he spoke, he saw understanding dawn in their eyes, not just acceptance, but recognition that what had happened in their town that stormy night had been merely the beginning of something larger. The Desert Phantom, teaching lawmen, Dr. Morris marveled. The world really is changing. "Not the Phantom," Tom corrected gently, "just a bartender who learned that true strength isn't found in a gun barrel. It's found here." He gestured to the saloon around them, to the bullet holes they had chosen to keep, to the scarred bar that had witnessed both violence and redemption, to the people who had stood by him when the past came calling. "To new beginnings," Julia proposed, raising her glass. "And old wisdom," Thorpe added. "To finding purpose," Tom said quietly, "in the last place you expected to look." As their glasses clinked together, the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the remaining dust motes in the air. They danced in the golden light, transformed from ordinary to extraordinary by nothing more than a change in perspective, much like a certain bartender who had once been the deadliest gunfighter in the West. The arrangement Tom had made with Governor Stanton proved more challenging in practice than in theory. The journey between Copper Creek and Prescott took 2 full days by stagecoach, meaning every visit to either place required nearly a week of travel time. Still, he managed to find a rhythm over the following months, spending 3 weeks training peace officers in Prescott, then returning to Copper Creek for 2 weeks to tend bar at the Golden Spur. Julia had hired a young man named Peter Collins to help during Tom's absences, but the locals still preferred being served by the legendary bartender when he was in town. Tom found he enjoyed the contrast between his 2 lives, the quiet familiarity of the saloon and the energetic purpose of the training program. Each seemed to nourish something different in his soul. It was during his 3rd rotation back to Copper Creek that the stranger arrived. The man was tall and lean, dressed in clothes that had once been fine but now showed the wear of hard travel. He entered the Golden Spur just before dusk, when the saloon was beginning to fill with its regular evening crowd. Tom noticed him immediately, not because he seemed threatening, but because of the careful way he surveyed the room, taking in exits and occupants with a single sweep of his eyes. It was a habit Tom recognized from his own past. The stranger approached the bar, removing his hat to reveal hair gone silver at the temples. His face bore the lined evidence of years spent under harsh sun and harsher circumstances, but his eyes were clear and direct. "Whiskey," he said simply. "Whatever's best." Tom reached for the top shelf, selecting a bottle he reserved for special occasions. As he poured, he studied the man's hands. Steady, weathered, with calluses that spoke of both guns and horses. "Passing through?" Tom asked, sliding the glass across the polished wood. The stranger's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "That depends on what I find here." He took a careful sip of the whiskey, eyes widening slightly in appreciation. Quality like this might be worth staying a while. Copper Creek has its charms, Tom agreed, though most travelers find them subtle. The man nodded, then set his glass down deliberately. I'm looking for someone. Heard he might be in these parts. The saloon seemed to quiet slightly around them, though in reality, the conversation levels remained unchanged. It was Tom's awareness that had sharpened, his senses tuning to potential danger. Copper Creek's a small place, he replied evenly. Most folks know each other here. This would be someone unusual, man with a reputation. The stranger's eyes fixed on Tom's face. They call him the Desert Phantom. Several nearby patrons stiffened, attention now genuinely drawn to the exchange. In the corner, Sheriff Thorpe, who had stopped in for his evening coffee, shifted subtly in his chair. Tom's expression remained neutral. Sounds like a ghost story, something to scare children with around campfires. Maybe, the stranger conceded, but I have good reason to believe he's real, and that he tends bar in a place very much like this one. He took another sip of whiskey. My name's Lawrence. Caldwell. Colonel Lawrence Caldwell, retired, United States Army. Tom's hand paused almost imperceptibly as he wiped the bar. The name was familiar, painfully so. Military men pass through occasionally, he said carefully, usually on their way to Fort Whipple. Caldwell set his empty glass down, pushing it forward for a refill that Tom provided automatically. I'm not headed to Whipple. My soldiering days are long behind me. He studied Tom with increased intensity. Interesting thing about legends, they start somewhere, have roots in truth. The Desert Phantom, for instance. Stories say he was the fastest gun in the territory, that he could read a man's intentions before the man himself knew them, that he disappeared after a shootout in Silver Canyon. Stories grow in the telling, Tom observed, especially out here where entertainment is scarce. True enough. Caldwell leaned forward slightly, but in this case, I have personal interest in separating fact from fiction. You see, my daughter was in Silver Canyon. The air seemed to vanish from Tom's lungs. His hands, always so steady, trembled just enough to send a ripple across the surface of the whiskey he was pouring. Your daughter, he repeated softly. Maria, Caldwell confirmed. Maria Delgado. She took her mother's name after I was deployed. Thought it would be safer for a young woman alone on the frontier. Tom set the bottle down with deliberate care. Around them, the saloon had gone genuinely quiet now, patrons sensing the weight of the moment unfolding. I know about Maria, Tom said, his voice barely audible. And Silver Canyon, most folks around here do. Then you know she died there, along with 9 members of the Martinez gang. Only one man walked away alive. Caldwell's eyes had not left Tom's face. The Desert Phantom! Sheriff Thorpe stood up, moving casually toward the bar. Evening, Colonel, he said, inserting himself into the conversation. Jack Thorpe, Copper Creek Sheriff. Can I help you with something? Caldwell acknowledged him with a nod. Just having a conversation with your bartender here. Tom's a valued member of our community, Thorpe said mildly. Whatever business you have with him, you have with all of us. The colonel studied the lawman thoughtfully. I respect loyalty, Sheriff, but this is personal. Julia appeared from the back room, alerted by the unusual silence in her normally lively establishment. Her eyes took in the tableau at the bar, Tom's rigid posture, the stranger's intense focus, Thorpe's protective stance. Everything all right, Tom? She asked, her hand sliding beneath the bar where the shotgun waited. Fine, Julia, Tom assured her, though his eyes never left Caldwell's face. The colonel was just telling me about his daughter. Understanding flashed across Julia's features. She had heard the story of Maria, whispered late one night when Tom's defenses had been lowered by exhaustion and trust. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private, she suggested, gesturing toward the back room. Tom shook his head slightly. No need for privacy. Whatever the Colonel has to say, he can say it here. Caldwell studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. He finished his second whiskey in a single swallow. For 6 years, I've been tracking rumors about Silver Canyon, about what really happened there, about the man they call the Desert Phantom. Most trails went cold, but then stories started circulating about Copper Creek, about outlaws who came looking for a legend and found something else. If you're hunting the Phantom, Tom said quietly, you're chasing shadows. There's no one by that name here. I'm not looking for a name, Caldwell replied. I'm looking for answers about how my daughter died, about why the man she loved wasn't able to protect her. The words struck Tom like physical blows. His knuckles whitened where they gripped the edge of the bar. The man she loved failed her, he said, voice raw with an emotion he rarely displayed. Failed her completely. Sheriff Thorpe's hand settled on Tom's shoulder, a gesture of support and warning combined. Tom, it's all right, Jack. Tom straightened, meeting Caldwell's gaze directly. The Colonel deserves the truth. After 6 years of searching, he's earned that much. Caldwell's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then you admit it? You're him? The Desert Phantom? I was, Tom corrected. Once. Now I'm just a bartender, and sometimes a teacher. The Colonel absorbed this, eyes, never leaving Tom's face. When Maria wrote about you in her letters, she never mentioned that name. She called you Thomas, said you were the gentlest soul she'd ever known, despite what others feared about you. Tom closed his eyes briefly, the pain of memory evident in every line of his body. Maria saw things in me that weren't there, goodness I didn't possess. She was an excellent judge of character, Caldwell said softly, always had been, even as a child. The saloon remained unnaturally quiet, its patrons frozen in place, witnessing the collision of past and present. Even old Hank, normally oblivious to the subtleties of social interaction, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. What happened in Silver Canyon? Caldwell asked finally. The real story, not the legend. Tom was silent for a long moment, his eyes focused on some middle distance where memory lived. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of long-buried truth. Martinez's gang tracked us to Silver Canyon. We'd been hiding there for months, thought we were safe. Maria and I had built a small cabin, were planning to marry when the winter passed. His hands moved automatically to pour another whiskey for Caldwell. They came at dawn, 10 of them. I was checking traps up in the hills. By the time I heard the shots, he broke off, the pain still fresh after 6 years. Thorpe's hand tightened. On his shoulder. I killed 9 of them, Tom continued finally. Martinez was the last. He had Maria as a shield, his gun to her head. He said he'd let her go if I dropped my weapon. A bitter smile touched his lips. I believed him. Fool that I was. What happened? Caldwell asked, his own voice strained. Now, I dropped my gun. He laughed, and then he... Tom's voice faltered. He shot her anyway. Last thing she saw was me standing there, unarmed, useless. The Colonel's face had gone pale. And Martinez. I got to my gun fast enough for him. Too late for her. Tom's eyes, when they met Caldwell's, were haunted. I held her while she died. She asked me to find peace, said there'd been enough killing. That sounds like Maria, Caldwell whispered, always seeing the best path forward even at the end. A heavy silence fell between them. Outside, the sun had set, leaving the saloon in the warm glow of lamplight. The regular patrons had resumed their conversations, though in more subdued tones, giving the two men their privacy without leaving them truly alone. "I tracked you here to kill you," Caldwell said finally, the words falling into the space between them like stones. "Spent 6 years believing you were responsible for her death." Tom nodded once, acceptance in every line of his body. "You wouldn't be the first to try." "But Maria wouldn't want that," the colonel continued. "She'd be horrified to think her father came seeking vengeance in her name." He studied Tom's face. "She'd be proud, though, to see what you've become. This place, these people who stand with you." "I don't deserve pride," Tom said softly, "or forgiveness. That's not for you to decide." Caldwell reached into his coat, causing a momentary tension until he produced a small, leather-bound book. "Her journal. Found it when I finally made it to Silver Canyon 4 years ago. There's a passage in here I think you should see." He opened the journal to a marked page and placed it on the bar, sliding it toward Tom. The handwriting was delicate but confident, the words flowing across the page in neat lines. Tom's hands trembled as he lifted the book. His eyes moved over. The words, and those watching, saw something break and heal simultaneously in his expression. "Read it," Caldwell urged. "Aloud." Tom cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Thomas believes his past makes him unworthy of happiness. He carries the weight of every life he's taken, every choice made in darkness. What he doesn't understand is that this very burden is what makes him worthy of love. His conscience, his regret, his desire to be better, these are the qualities that set him apart from the men he once rode with. I see in him not the killer others fear, but the protector I love. The man who checks my wound dressings with hands that tremble in tenderness, who reads poetry by firelight, who dreams of a world where his gun can finally rest. That is the true Thomas, the one I have promised myself to. And if fate grants us our tomorrow, I will spend my life helping him see himself through my eyes, instead of through the dark mirror of his memory." Tom closed the journal gently, passing it back to Caldwell with reverence. "I never knew," he said quietly, "what she truly thought, what she saw in me." "Maria always saw beneath surfaces," Caldwell replied, "to the heart of things, of people." He placed the journal back inside his coat. "I came here for justice, but I can see now that Maria already found it, in you, in the man you've become." Julia moved closer, her presence a silent support. Thorpe's hand remained on Tom's shoulder, grounding him as the past and present reconciled. "Stay," Tom said, suddenly. "In Copper Creek for a few days at least. I can tell you about her, the time we had, and you—" His voice caught. "You could tell me about the Maria I never knew, the child, the young woman." Caldwell studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'd like that." The conversation that followed lasted deep into the night, long after the regular patrons had gone home. Julia kept the lamps lit and the coffee flowing as Tom and Caldwell shared stories of Maria, her childhood pranks and teenage stubbornness, her love of music and fierce independence, her compassion that extended to everyone she met. By the time dawn lightened the eastern sky, something had shifted between the two men. Not friendship exactly, but understanding, a shared grief that when carried together seemed somehow lighter for them both. Caldwell stayed in Copper Creek for a week, taking a room at the hotel and spending his evenings at the Golden Spur. The locals welcomed him with cautious warmth that grew more genuine as they saw how his presence seemed to lift a burden from Tom's shoulders. On his last night, as Tom walked him back to the hotel, Caldwell stopped beneath the star-filled sky. "There's something I want you to have," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small object that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Maria's locket. It has her mother's picture inside, and now a small cutting from her journal. Words meant for you. Tom stared at the offered gift, overwhelmed. Colonel, I can't. Lawrence, the older man corrected gently. And yes, you can. She would want you to have it. A reminder not of what you lost, but of what you found, of who you truly are. Slowly, Tom accepted the locket, closing his fingers around it carefully. Thank you. I'll be back, Caldwell promised. Perhaps in the spring. I'd like to see this training program of yours in Prescott. Sounds like something Maria would have believed in. As the stagecoach carried Caldwell away the following morning, Tom stood on the street outside the Golden Spur, the locket now hanging around his neck, beneath his shirt. Its weight against his skin was both unfamiliar and right, another piece of his fragmented past, finding its place in the mosaic of his present. Julia joined him as the coach disappeared around a bend in the road. You okay? She asked softly. Better than I've been in a long time, Tom admitted. Like a wound that's finally been cleaned properly instead of just covered over. She studied his face, noting the new ease in his expression. He could have killed you. Came here intending to. Many have, Tom said simply. But Maria's father is a better man than most. Like daughter, like father, Julia observed. She saw the good in you. So did he in the end. Tom's hand rose unconsciously to touch the place where the locket rested against his chest. She left me a compass, he said quietly, even in death, pointing toward who I could become. As they turned back toward the saloon, the morning sun caught the windows of the Golden Spur, transforming ordinary glass into panels of gold. Tom paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the place that had become his sanctuary and his purpose. Beautiful, Julia murmured, following his gaze. More than just beautiful, Tom replied. It's home. The week following Caldwell's departure brought an unexpected visit from Deputy Marshal Hayes, riding hard from Prescott with urgent news. He arrived dusty and travel-worn, his normally immaculate uniform showing the effects of a journey made. In haste, Ryder, he called, spotting Tom on the saloon's porch where he was replacing a warped board. Need a word? Tom straightened, hearing something in the man's voice that set him on alert. Inside, he suggested, nodding toward the door. Once settled at a corner table with coffee that Julia provided without being asked, Hayes didn't waste time on pleasantries. Governor Stanton's been shot. Tom went very still. How bad? Bad enough. Took a bullet in the shoulder. Another grazed his head. Doctor says he'll recover, but it'll be slow. Who did it? Hayes's expression darkened. That's why I'm here. It was one of our trainees, James Bennett. The name struck Tom like a physical blow. Bennett had been one of the most promising officers in the program, intelligent, disciplined, seemingly committed to the new approach. Why? Tom asked, though he already suspected the answer. Says you're a fraud, Hayes replied bluntly. Says the Desert Phantom is teaching men to be weak, hesitant, that the territory needs strength, not philosophy. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. He's gathered a group around him, maybe 15 men, calling themselves the Righteous Guns. They've declared war on your training program, on everything. Stanton was building. Tom absorbed this, his mind already calculating implications, threats, necessary responses. The other trainees. Most are still loyal, some are wavering. Bennett's got a persuasive way about him, and he's playing on old fears, old habits. Hayes met Tom's eyes directly. They're coming here next. Bennett was quite clear about that. Says he's going to expose the Desert Phantom as a coward who hides behind words instead of standing for justice. When? 2 days, maybe 3. Hayes glanced around the quiet saloon. This town isn't ready for what's coming, Ryder. Tom's face hardened into lines that few in Copper Creek had ever seen. The Desert Phantom emerging from beneath the bartenders. Calm exterior. It's more ready than Bennett realizes. Word spread quickly through Copper Creek. as it always did when trouble loomed. By nightfall, the town had organized itself with the efficiency of long practice. Sheriff Thorpe deputized 8 men, including young Ethan Miller, who had proven himself steady under pressure. Julia, Rebecca, and other women prepared the church to serve as both fortress and infirmary should the need arise. Even old Hank found purpose, his knowledge of the surrounding terrain proving invaluable as they planned defensive positions. The Golden Spur became their headquarters, its scarred bar now covered with maps of the town and surrounding areas. Tom moved among the gathered townspeople, his quiet authority a steadying influence as fear threatened to overwhelm preparations. "This Bennett," Sheriff Thorpe asked during a lull, "how dangerous is he?" "Very," Tom replied frankly. "He was military before joining the program. Skilled tactician, excellent shot, but most dangerous is his conviction. He truly believes he's right, that what we're teaching is weakness disguised as wisdom." "And the men with him?" "Similar backgrounds, former soldiers, bounty hunters, men who've made their living with guns and view any other approach as compromise." Tom traced potential approaches to the town on the map. "They'll come with overwhelming force, expecting us to either flee or surrender." Dr. Morris, who had been listening nearby, joined them at the bar. "What will we do instead?" Tom looked up, meeting the physician's concerned gaze. "We'll use their expectations against them, just as I taught in Prescott." Through the night and into the following day, they worked, digging defensive positions, establishing communication signals, moving the elderly and children to the relative safety of the mines outside town. By dusk of the second day, Copper Creek had transformed from a peaceful settlement into a community prepared for siege. Tom spent the evening hours checking each position personally, speaking with every person who would stand in defense of their town, not giving orders, he had no authority for that, but offering guidance, encouragement, and most importantly, perspective. "Remember," he told a group of nervous shopkeepers turned sentries, "Bennett and his men believe in force above all. They expect the same from us. Our advantage lies in showing them a different path, one they aren't prepared for." As night settled fully over Copper Creek, Tom returned to the Golden Spur. The saloon stood dark and shuttered, its usual warmth and life temporarily suspended. Inside, by the light of a single lamp, he found Julia checking the shotgun that had hung behind the bar for years. "You should be at the church with the others," he said quietly. She didn't look up from her task. "This is my place. I'll defend it alongside you." "Julia, don't," she interrupted, her voice firm. "Don't tell me it's too dangerous or that you need to face them alone. This isn't just about you anymore, Tom. It's about everything we've built here, everything we believe." He studied her. In the lamplight, her competent hands, her determined expression, the strength that had nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with conviction. In that moment, she reminded him painfully of Maria, another woman who had seen beyond the legend to the man beneath. "All right," he conceded, "but stay behind the bar. There's better cover there." She offered a tight smile. "I know. Why do you think I chose it?" They fell silent then, each absorbed in their own preparations for what morning would bring. Tom cleaned his Colt with the same methodical precision he applied to polishing glasses, each movement automatic after years of practice. Yet unlike in years past, when such preparations had been merely pragmatic, he now felt the weight of each bullet, each decision that might come with dawn. Maria's locket rested against his chest, its presence a reminder of promises made and kept, of the man he had chosen to become. Caldwell's visit had changed something fundamental in Tom's perception of his own past. Where once he had seen only failure and loss, he now recognized a journey, painful and costly, but leading nonetheless to something worthwhile. The floor creaked, and Tom looked up to find Sheriff Thorpe standing in the doorway, his silhouette Familiar and reassuring. Riders spotted to the north, Thorpe reported. Moving slow, making camp about 5 miles out. Scout counted 20, maybe more. More than Hayes estimated, Tom observed. Word spreads. Men looking for a cause or just an excuse for violence. Thorpe moved further into the room, settling heavily into a chair. We're outnumbered. We always were, Tom replied. But numbers aren't what will decide this. The sheriff studied him curiously. What then? Conviction. Purpose. Tom slid, his cleaned gun into its holster. Bennett believes he's fighting for the soul of the territory, but he's really just fighting against change, against the unfamiliar, against fear of his own irrelevance. And us? What are we fighting for? Tom considered the question carefully. Not fighting against, but for. For a place where people can build lives without fear, where justice doesn't always wear a gun, where redemption isn't just a word, but a possibility. He touched the locket briefly. For a world Maria would have wanted to live in. Thorpe nodded, slowly, understanding. Get some rest if you can, he advised, rising to leave. Dawn comes early. The sky had just begun to lighten toward dawn when the watchman's signal came. 3 sharp rings of the church bell echoing through the stillness. Tom, who had been sitting motionless in a chair by the saloon window, rose without haste. Across the room, Julia emerged from the back, where she had managed a few hours of restless sleep. They're coming, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Tom checked his gun one last time, then secured it in its holster. Remember the plan. No matter what happens, what you see or hear, stick to what we discussed. She nodded, though anxiety showed clearly in her eyes. Be careful, Tom. He offered a slight smile, the expression softening the hard lines of his face. Always am. Outside, Copper Creek waited in tense silence. The street stood empty in the gray pre-dawn light, buildings shuttered and still. But behind windows, around corners and atop strategic rooftops, the town's defenders watched and waited. Tom walked alone down the center of the main street, his footsteps raising small puffs of dust in the dry morning air. He moved with unhurried confidence, each step deliberate, his hands conspicuously empty at his sides. At the edge of town, he stopped, facing north toward the approaching riders now visible on the horizon. They came in formation, a solid line of mounted men spread across the road, moving at a walking pace that emphasized both their number and their discipline. In the lead rode a tall figure on a black horse, James Bennett, his military background evident in his posture and the precision of his approach. 23 men, Tom counted, more than expected, but not enough to change the essentials of what must happen next. As the riders drew closer, they slowed further, clearly surprised to find a solitary figure awaiting them, rather than a fortified defense. Bennett raised his hand, signaling his men to halt about 50 yards from where Tom stood. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The desert phantom and the man who had come to expose him, each taking the measure of the other across the distance that separated them. Then Bennett nudged his horse forward, advancing alone until just 10 paces remained between them. Up close, his features were sharper than Tom remembered, younger in years but older in spirit, with eyes that held both intelligence and dangerous certainty. "Ryder," he greeted coldly, "or should I call you Phantom?" "Tom will do," he replied evenly. "It's the name my friends use." "We're not friends." Bennett's gaze swept past him to the apparently deserted town. "Where are they all hiding? The good people of Copper Creek? Your loyal disciples?" "They're waiting to see if there's going to be trouble," Tom said, "or if you're just passing through." A humorless smile touched Bennett's lips. "Oh, there's going to be trouble, the kind that exposes frauds and finishes legends." "There's another option," Tom offered. "We could talk, like reasonable men." Talk. Bennett practically spat the word. That's your answer to everything, isn't it? Talk while good men die, talk while outlaws and killers roam free, talk while the territory bleeds. He leaned forward in his saddle. Governor Stanton was a fool to listen to you. I've merely corrected his mistake. By shooting an unarmed man, Tom asked quietly. That's your definition of justice? Bennett's eyes narrowed. He'll recover. The territory may not, if your poison spreads any further. Behind him, his men shifted restlessly, hands never far from their weapons. They had come expecting resistance, prepared for violence. The calm conversation unfolding before them was clearly not what they had anticipated. What exactly do you want here, Bennett? Tom asked. Justice, truth. Bennett straightened in his saddle. I want the people to see what their legendary desert phantom really is, a coward hiding behind pretty words and false ideals. And how do you plan to show them that? A cold smile spread across Bennett's features. By calling you out, right here, right now, man to man. Tom regarded him steadily. A gunfight in the middle of town. Unless you're afraid, Bennett taunted. Unless all those stories about your speed and skill were just that, stories. I'm not afraid, Tom replied simply, but I am disappointed. I taught you better than this, James. Something flickered in Bennett's expression. Doubt, perhaps, or wounded pride. It vanished quickly beneath renewed determination. Your teachings are the problem, he declared. The territory doesn't need men who hesitate, who second-guess themselves. It needs men of action, men willing to do what's necessary. Even if what's necessary is murder. Justice, Bennett insisted, swift and certain. Tom shook his head, slightly. Justice without mercy is just revenge. Without thought, it's merely reaction. Without compassion, it's nothing but violence wearing a badge. Enough philosophy, Bennett snapped. Will you face me or prove me right about what you really are? For a long moment, Tom was silent, his eyes never leaving Bennett's face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the dusty street to the waiting riders. I'll face you, he said quietly, but not the way you expect. In a deliberate motion that drew gasps from Bennett's men, Tom reached for his gun. But instead of drawing it, he unbuckled the entire holster and let it fall to the ground at his feet. What are you doing? Bennett demanded, confusion warring with anger in his expression. Choosing, Tom replied simply. Just as I've taught others to choose, just as I'm teaching you now, though you don't recognize the lesson. He took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. Bennett's hand dropped instinctively to his gun. Stop right there, he ordered, voice tight with tension. Tom continued his advance, measured and unhurried. You came here to expose the truth about the desert phantom, he said. So here it is. I've killed more men than you've ever met. Faster, deadlier men than you'll ever be. And each death left a mark on me that no amount of time can erase. Another step. Bennett's horse shifted nervously beneath him. I know what you're feeling right now, Tom continued. The fear disguised as righteousness. The certainty that violence is the only language some men understand. The belief that your gun is what makes you powerful. I'm warning you, Bennett said, drawing his revolver and aiming it squarely at Tom's chest. Tom stopped directly before him, the gun barrel now inches from his heart. Behind Bennett, his men watched in stunned silence, caught completely off guard by this turn of events. You want to know who the Desert Phantom really is? Tom asked softly. He's the man who learned that the hardest battle isn't against others. It's against your own worst instincts. The man who discovered that true courage isn't found in a gun barrel, but in the willingness to face each day without one. You're insane, Bennett whispered, but his hand trembled slightly. No, Tom corrected gently. I'm free. Free from the cycle of violence that you're still trapped in. Free from the need to prove myself through the death of others. Movement caught his attention, subtle shifts among Bennett's men. Some had lowered their weapons, confusion and uncertainty replacing their earlier bravado. Others watched their leader, waiting for guidance that he seemed increasingly unable to provide. "Your men are watching, James," Tom said quietly. "They're waiting to see what kind of leader you truly are, what kind of future you're offering them. Think carefully about what happens next." Bennett's gun remained leveled at Tom's chest, but indecision clouded his features. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows across the dusty street and illuminating the faces of the men who waited to witness either bloodshed or something entirely unexpected. "This is your trick," Bennett said, his voice less certain than before. "You're trying to make me look like the aggressor, the villain." "No tricks," Tom replied calmly. "Just a choice. Your choice. You can shoot an unarmed man and prove that everything I ever taught about restraint and judgment was right, or you can lower that gun and show that you're capable of something better." For what seemed an eternity, the tableau held. Tom standing unprotected in the street, Bennett with his weapon drawn, 24 men watching in tense silence as history balanced on the edge of a trigger. Then, from one of the buildings, a door opened. Julia Carson stepped into the street, unarmed and unafraid. She walked with deliberate steps until she stood beside Tom. "If you're going to shoot him," she said to Bennett, her voice steady, "you'll have to shoot me too." Before Bennett could respond, another door opened. Dr. Morris emerged, moving to join them. "And me," he added quietly. One by one, the people of Copper Creek appeared. Sheriff Thorpe and his deputies, old Hank leaning on his cane, Rebecca. From the saloon, storekeepers and miners, ranchers and craftsmen. They formed a line on either side of Tom, a living wall of ordinary people standing against violence with nothing but their presence and conviction. Bennett's eyes widened as he took in the scene unfolding before him. This was not the confrontation he had envisioned, not the dramatic showdown that would prove his point about strength and weakness. "What is this?" he demanded, his gun now wavering between multiple potential targets. "Community," Tom answered simply. "The thing you're supposedly fighting to protect. These people aren't hiding behind me, Bennett. I'm standing with them. This is what real strength looks like." A murmur ran through Bennett's men, uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. Some exchanged glances, others shifted their horses, as if preparing to withdraw. "They're using you," Bennett insisted, but his words lacked conviction. "Making you their shield." "No one's using anyone," Sheriff Thorpe replied. "We stand together because that's what we believe in. What Tom taught us, that true justice comes from unity, not division. From understanding, not just force." Bennett looked from face to face, his expression moving through confusion, anger, and finally, a reluctant comprehension. His gun lowered slightly. "This isn't how it was supposed to be," he muttered. "Rarely is," Tom agreed. "That's why we need wisdom more than weapons." A rider from Bennett's group suddenly spurred his horse forward, breaking their line. It was Peter Reynolds, a man Tom remembered as particularly volatile during training. "This is pathetic," Reynolds sneered, drawing his own gun. "They're making fools of us, of you, Bennett." "Peter, don't," Bennett warned. But Reynolds was already taking aim, not at Tom, but at Julia. "Let's see how peaceful the Phantom stays when his woman gets—" He never finished the sentence. Tom's movement was so swift it seemed impossible. One moment standing empty-handed, the next hurling a small stone with deadly accuracy. The projectile struck Reynolds' hand just as he fired, sending his shot wild. The gun clattered to the street as Reynolds clutched his injured fingers, cursing in pain and surprise. In the shocked silence that followed, Tom's voice cut clearly through the morning air. "Violence is always an option," he said, addressing both Bennett and his men. but rarely the best one. I chose not to carry a gun today, but that doesn't mean I came unarmed." He tapped his temple. "The mind is the deadliest weapon anyone can wield. I taught you that in Prescott." Bennett stared at him, then at Reynolds, then finally at the line of townspeople still standing firm. Something in his demeanor changed, a subtle shift from belligerence to uncertainty. "Stand down," he ordered his men, holstering his own weapon. "All of you." Reynolds glared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. After coming all this way." "I said stand down," Bennett repeated, his voice harder now. "That's an order." The tension in the air remained palpable as Bennett dismounted, approaching Tom on foot. He stopped a few paces away, studying the man he had come to challenge. "You could have killed Reynolds just now," he observed, "with a stone of all things." "Could have," Tom agreed. "Chose not to." "Why?" "Because death should always be the last option, not the first. Because every life matters, even the misguided ones." His eyes held Bennett's. "Because I meant every word I taught you in Prescott, whether you believed it or not." Bennett absorbed this, conflict evident in his expression. "Governor Stanton will recover," Tom finished for him. "And when he does, he'll face a choice about how to respond to what you did, just as you're facing a choice right now." Around them, the town held its collective breath. Julia's hand found Tom's, gripping it tightly. "I believed in the program once," Bennett admitted finally. "Before I convinced myself it was weakness disguised as wisdom. Before I let bitterness and impatience cloud my judgment." "It's not too late to find that belief again," Tom said quietly. The morning had grown warm, the sun rising higher over the town that still stood peaceful despite all expectations to the contrary. In the distance, a meadowlark called, a hopeful sound in the tense silence. "I can't undo what I did," Bennett said at last. "No," Tom agreed, "but you can choose what you do next. We all can." Something settled in Bennett's features. Not surrender. Exactly, but a kind of clarity. He turned to his men, who watched with varying expressions of confusion and respect. "We're leaving," he announced. "Those who wish to follow me back to Prescott, to face whatever consequences await there, can do so. The rest of you can go your own way. But there will be no violence in Copper Creek today." Murmurs rippled through the group, but none openly challenged his decision. One by one, they turned their horses, some falling in behind Bennett, others breaking off in different directions. Reynolds hesitated longest, his face dark with thwarted anger, before finally spurring his mount to follow. The main group. As the riders departed, the citizens of Copper Creek remained where they stood, a living barrier that had stopped bullets with nothing but conviction. Only when the last horseman had disappeared from view did they begin to disperse, returning to homes and businesses with the quiet satisfaction of a crisis averted. Tom bent to retrieve his discarded gun belt, strapping it back into place with practiced ease. Some habits, it seemed, were not so easily abandoned. "That was quite a risk you took," Sheriff Thorpe observed, joining him. "Standing unarmed before a man intent on killing you." "Not as much risk as you might think," Tom replied. "I've spent 6 years learning to read men like Bennett. He needed to prove something, to himself more than to anyone else. My gun would have given him the excuse he was looking for, and without it," Tom's mouth quirked in a small smile, "without it, he had to face the man, not the legend. Much harder to justify shooting someone who refuses to shoot back." Julia approached, her face flushed with the aftermath of tension and relief. "You knew the town would stand with you?" "I hoped," Tom corrected gently. "Faith is different from certainty." Dr. Morris joined them, shaking his head in bemused admiration. 6 years ago, I watched you face down the Holloway gang with nothing but steel in your eyes. Today, you face down 20 armed men with nothing but conviction in your heart. Tell me, which was harder?" "Today," Tom answered without hesitation. Facing men with guns is easy compared to facing your own doubts. As they walked back toward the Golden Spur, the town began returning to its normal rhythms. Doors and windows opening, people greeting one another with the heightened appreciation that comes from averted disaster. What had been meant as a day of reckoning had instead become an affirmation of everything they had built together. Bennett will have to answer for shooting the governor, Thorpe noted soberly. No way around that. Yes, Tom agreed, but he chose to face those consequences rather than compound his mistakes. That matters. And what about you? Julia asked. Will you return to Prescott? The program will need leadership now more than ever. Tom considered this, his hand rising unconsciously to touch the locket beneath his shirt. Yes, he said finally, but differently than before. Today showed me that theory isn't enough. The men we train need to see these principles in action, not just hear about them in a warehouse. What do you mean? I mean that perhaps Copper Creek has as much to teach as Prescott does. Tom's eyes swept the town that had become his home and his redemption. Maybe it's time to bring the students here, at least for part of their training. Let them see what a community built on mutual respect and restraint looks like. Let them experience what they're meant to protect. The idea took root quickly, finding fertile ground in a town already transformed by its encounter with the Desert Phantom years earlier. Within a month, arrangements had been made to accommodate rotating groups of trainees from Prescott, with townspeople volunteering to host them, teach them, show them the day-to-day reality of frontier life beyond guns and glory. Governor Stanton, recovering steadily from his wounds, embraced the expanded vision enthusiastically. What happened in Copper Creek proves everything we've been trying to teach, he wrote to Tom. Theory tested by fire and found not wanting. Bennett and his compatriots are facing justice, but I've made it clear that their eventual rehabilitation, rather than mere punishment, is our goal. The cycle must be broken somewhere. Tom read the letter aloud to Julia as they sat on the saloon's newly built porch at sunset. The Golden Spur had been expanded, with rooms added above for visiting trainees and a new wing that served as a classroom and meeting space. The bullet holes in the walls remained, preserved now as deliberate reminders of the path not taken. Rehabilitation, Julia mused, watching the golden light fade from the distant mountains. Bennett shot the man, and Stanton's concerned with saving him. Remarkable. Jack Thorpe saved me, Tom reminded her. After Maria died, after Silver Canyon. When I was drowning in blood and regret, sometimes all it takes is one person believing in the possibility of change. She studied him in the fading light, noting how the years had gentled his features without diminishing the essential strength there. Do you think Bennett can change, truly? I think everyone can, given the right circumstances and sufficient motivation. Tom folded Stanton's letter carefully. Bennett was lost, not evil. There's a difference. And those who are truly evil, Julia pressed. Men like Vincent Holloway, who kill for pleasure. Tom was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. Even then, the question isn't what they deserve, but what we become in administering it. Justice without mercy makes monsters of us all, eventually. The first group of trainees arrived in early autumn, when the aspens in the hills around Copper Creek had turned to gold. 12 men selected from the program in Prescott. They came with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity about the town that had become legendary in territorial law enforcement circles. Tom greeted them not at the Golden Spur, but at Sheriff Thorpe's office, where the lawman had prepared a simple introduction to the town and its history. The men were visibly disappointed to find the famed Desert Phantom dressed like any other townsman without the trappings of legend they had expected. You'll be staying with host families during your month here, Thorpe explained, assigning them to various households. Not as guests, but as contributing members. You'll help with chores, participate in community events, and yes, assist with law enforcement when needed. We didn't come here to milk cows, one trainee protested. We came to learn from the desert, Phantom. And so you shall, Tom replied mildly, but not in the way you might expect. The most important lessons rarely come in the form we anticipate. The trainees exchanged dubious glances, but none openly challenged the arrangement. They dispersed to their assigned homes, where townspeople welcomed them with a warmth that clearly took many by surprise. Over the following weeks, Tom observed their gradual integration into the life of Copper Creek. At first awkward and resistant, they slowly began to form connections with the people whose safety men like them were meant to ensure. They helped repair roofs damaged in a recent storm, assisted with the harvest at nearby farms, taught children to ride and shoot under careful supervision. Most importantly, they witnessed firsthand how Sheriff Thorpe maintained order with minimal force, resolving disputes through mediation rather than threats, building relationships that prevented violence before it could erupt, demonstrating daily the principles that Tom had been teaching in Prescott. Not all the trainees embraced the approach. 3 requested transfers back to more traditional units, but the majority stayed, increasingly engaged, as theory became practice before their eyes. This is working, Deputy Marshal Hayes observed, during a visit midway through the first rotation. They're different from when they arrived, less rigid, more thoughtful. It's not me, Tom said, watching a group of trainees helping to raise a new barn at the edge of town. It's the experience itself. Living among the people you serve changes your perspective. Don't underestimate your influence, Hayes countered. The way you resolve the confrontation with Bennett has become something of a legend in itself. A different kind of legend than the Desert Phantom, but perhaps a more important one. As autumn deepened toward winter, bringing the first dusting of snow to the mountains surrounding Copper Creek, Tom found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. From gunfighter to bartender to teacher, each transformation had seemed unlikely, even impossible, until it happened. The Golden Spur remained his anchor, the place where he felt most himself. Though his responsibilities had expanded considerably, he still made time each evening to tend bar, listening to the stories and concerns of townspeople and trainees alike. The simple ritual of polishing glasses while observing the human drama around him had become almost meditative, a practice that grounded him in the present while honoring his past. One evening, as the first serious snow of the season fell outside, the saloon was particularly busy. Locals mingled with trainees, sharing drinks and tales beside the crackling fire in the great stone hearth. Julia moved efficiently through the crowd, serving food from the kitchen that had been added during the recent renovation. Tom was wiping down the bar when he noticed a new arrival, an elderly man stamping snow from his boots at the entrance. There was something familiar about his bearing, about the way he surveyed the room with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly. The stranger approached the bar, removing his hat to reveal a shock of white hair, above a deeply lined face. "Heard I might find Thomas Ryder here," he said, his voice gravelly with age, but clear in purpose. "You found him," Tom replied, studying the man with growing recognition. "Though most folks just call me Tom." The old man nodded, a faint smile touching his weathered features. "Been a long time. Wasn't sure you'd remember me." "Marshal Frank Calloway," Tom said softly. "Hard to forget the man who tracked me for 2 years after Silver Canyon." Conversations nearby quieted as patrons sensed the significance of the encounter. Julia appeared at Tom's side, her posture suggesting protective concern. "It's all right," Tom assured her. "The Marshal and I are old acquaintances." He turned back to Calloway. What brings you to Copper Creek after all this time? Thought you'd retired years ago." "Did retire," Calloway confirmed. "Living down Tucson. Way now. But heard stories about what's happening here, about the legendary Desert Phantom teaching lawmen to think before they shoot." His eyes, still sharp despite his years, studied Tom intently. "Had to see for myself if it was true." Tom poured 2 whiskeys, sliding one across to the former marshal. "And now that you're here, what do you think?" Calloway picked up his glass, holding it to the light before taking a careful sip. "Think I spent 2 years hunting the wrong man," he said finally. "Or maybe the right man at the wrong time." "That was a different life," Tom observed. "For both of us. Yes and no." Calloway set his glass down deliberately. "Men like us, we carry our pasts with us. Can't outrun them, can't bury them deep enough. Question is what we build on top of those foundations." Tom nodded, understanding perfectly what the older man meant. "You didn't come all this way just to philosophize about the past." "No." Calloway reached into his coat, producing a folded document that he placed carefully on the bar. "Came to deliver this from Governor Stanton." Tom opened the document, reading its contents with growing surprise. Julia leaned closer, her eyes widening as she scanned the official language. "A pardon," she breathed. "Full and unconditional," Calloway confirmed, "for any and all actions committed during your years as the Desert Phantom. Governor feels it's long overdue, given your service to the territory." Tom stared at the paper in his hands, emotions warring across his face. "I never asked for this, which is precisely why you deserve it," Calloway replied. "Most men who merit pardons don't seek them. They're too busy making amends in other ways." The saloon had gone completely silent now, its occupants witnessing yet another turning point in the life of the man who had saved their town twice over, once with his gun, once with his conviction. "There's more," Calloway continued. "Governor's establishing a formal peace officer academy in Prescott. Wants you to head it, not as a temporary arrangement, but as its founding director." Tom looked up sharply. "I've made commitments here, to Copper Creek, to the Golden Spur." He knows that the position would allow for continued involvement in both places. "The academy would formalize what you've already created, a training program that rotates between Prescott and here, theory and practice in equal measure." Julia touched Tom's arm gently. "It's a remarkable opportunity, Tom." "It's more than that," Calloway added. "It's a chance to shape the future of law enforcement across the entire territory, maybe beyond." He finished his whiskey, setting the glass down with finality. "Governor's not asking for an answer tonight. Take time to consider it, but he hopes you'll accept." As Calloway prepared to leave, he paused, turning back to Tom with a look of grudging respect. "You know, I never understood why you disappeared after Silver Canyon. Why a man with your skills would choose to vanish rather than use them seemed like a waste." "And now?" Tom asked quietly. A hint of a smile touched the old marshal's lips. "Now I think maybe you were ahead of us all, seeing a future the rest of us couldn't imagine yet." He settled his hat firmly on his head. "Safe travels on the path you choose, Phantom, whichever it may be." After Calloway's departure, the saloon gradually returned to its normal hum of conversation, though with an undercurrent of excitement about what the marshal's visit might mean for the town and its most famous resident. Tom continued his work behind the bar, his movements as measured and precise as always, but his mind clearly elsewhere. The pardon lay where Calloway had placed it, its official seal catching the lamplight. Later, after the last patrons had gone and Julia was closing up the kitchen, Tom stood before the window, watching the snow fall in the silent street. The shoe pardon was in his hand again, its significance still settling into his consciousness. "What are you thinking?" Julia asked, joining him at the window. "About roads not taken," he replied softly. "About how they sometimes circle back to find us anyway." She studied his profile, familiar now after years of friendship that had deepened into something neither of them had fully named yet. "Will, you accept the governor's offer?" Tom was silent for a long moment, his eyes following the gentle descent of snowflakes illuminated by the saloon's lamps. "When I first came to Copper Creek," he said finally, "I was running away. From Silver Canyon, from Maria's death, from everything the Desert Phantom represented. I thought I could bury that part of myself behind this bar, under this new identity. And instead, I found that hiding from who you are never works. That the past isn't something to escape, but something to reconcile with." His hand rose unconsciously to the locket he still wore. Maria used to say that every experience, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones, shapes us into who we're meant to become. Julia nodded, understanding. "And who are you meant to become now, Tom Ryder?" He turned to her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Someone who honors both parts of himself. The quietude I found here, behind this bar, listening, more than speaking. And the purpose I found in Prescott, teaching men that there's a better way than the gun." "You can be both," she said simply. "Yes," he agreed. "I think perhaps I can." They stood together as the snow continued to fall, transforming Copper Creek into something new yet fundamentally unchanged, much like the man who had once been the Desert Phantom and was now becoming something else entirely, something without precedent or prototype. A teacher, a peacemaker, a legend who had transcended his own myth to become something far more valuable, a man who had found his true calling not in dealing death, but in nurturing life. The morning dawned clear and cold, the snow gleaming under a brilliant blue sky. Tom rose early, as was his habit, and walked through the quiet streets of Copper Creek. The town was still asleep, smoke rising from a few chimneys, the occasional sound of livestock from the stables, the only disruption to the winter stillness. He made his way to the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town, where a simple marker had been placed after Caldwell's visit, a memorial to Maria Delgado, though her body rested far away in Silver Canyon. Tom knelt beside it, brushing snow from the stone with gentle fingers. "I think I finally understand what you meant," he said softly to the silent marker. "About finding peace, not by forgetting the past, but by making it mean something, by using it to build something better." The rising sun cast his shadow long across the snow-covered ground, no longer the ominous silhouette of a gunfighter, but the more complex shape of a man who had found his way through darkness to something resembling light. As he walked back toward town, the decision that had been forming through the night solidified into certainty. He would accept the governor's offer, but on his own terms, maintaining his connection to Copper Creek while expanding the vision that had begun with Jack Thorpe's lessons all those years ago. The Desert Phantom would never truly disappear. Like the bullet holes preserved in the saloon walls, he would remain as a reminder of choices made and paths not taken. But Tom Ryder, the bartender who had become a teacher, would continue to evolve, carrying the past, not as a burden, but as a foundation for whatever came next. At the top of the street, he paused, looking down at the town that had become his sanctuary and his purpose. Copper Creek was stirring now, people emerging to clear snow from doorways, children venturing out to play in the transformed landscape. From the Golden Spur, smoke rose from the chimney where Julia would be stoking the morning fire. The pardon in his pocket represented more than legal absolution. It was acknowledgement that the territory itself was changing, growing beyond its violent beginnings towards something more civilized, more just. And Tom had been granted the privilege of helping guide that transformation, of ensuring that the lessons of the past served the needs of the future. "Time to get to work," he murmured to himself, heading toward the saloon where another day of serving drinks and teaching peace awaited. The man once known as the Desert Phantom, the deadliest gunslinger in the West, had found his true calling. Behind a scarred wooden bar in a town that had seen its share of violence but chosen a different path. Now he would help others make that same choice. One lesson, one life at a time. As he pushed through the batwing doors of the Golden Spur, the morning light caught the edges of the preserved bullet holes, transforming them from reminders of conflict to markers of change. Like the man himself, they remained, testament to what had been, silent witnesses to what could be. Tom Ryder hung his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and began polishing glasses with the same careful precision he applied to everything that mattered. The day's challenges awaited, but for this moment in this place, he was exactly where he was meant to be, a quiet bartender with an extraordinary past and an even more remarkable future. A man at peace with all the versions of himself that had led to this moment. The gunfighter who had learned restraint, the bartender who had found purpose, the teacher who would help shape a territory's destiny. A man who had discovered, finally, that true strength wasn't found in the speed of his draw or the accuracy of his aim, but in the wisdom to know when not to use either. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of night. Copper Creek stirred to life around him, forever changed, but somehow stronger for it. And in the Golden Spur Saloon, a legend continued his quiet work, one glass at a time, at peace with who he had been and who he had chosen to become. 10 years passed, bringing changes to both Copper Creek and the territory around it. The railroad had finally arrived, connecting the once isolated town to the wider world. New buildings of brick and stone had replaced some of the original wooden structures, though the Golden Spur remained largely unchanged, a deliberate preservation of history in a rapidly modernizing landscape. Tom Ryder's Peace Officer Academy had become an institution renowned throughout the West. What had begun as a controversial experiment was now the standard for law enforcement training across 3 territories. Men who had studied under the former Desert Phantom served as sheriffs, marshals, and judges, bringing a new philosophy of justice to communities that had once known only the rule of the gun. Copper Creek itself had grown, though not excessively. New families had settled, attracted by its reputation for safety and community. The bullet holes in the saloon walls had become something of a tourist attraction, with visitors often requesting that Tom tell the story of the night he faced down the Holloway Gang without firing a fatal shot. On a warm autumn afternoon, Tom stood on the porch of the Golden Spur, watching a group of academy trainees practicing conflict resolution techniques in the town square. Julia joined him, her hand finding his with the easy familiarity that came from years as partners in both business and life. 3 more coming in on tomorrow's train, she noted, referring to the latest group of recruits, including that young woman from San Francisco, the judge's daughter. Tom nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners in what passed for a smile. First female trainee, Jack would have approved. Sheriff Thorpe had passed away peacefully in his sleep 5 years earlier, but his influence remained strong in the town. He had helped shape the academy he had inspired. His name graced the main training hall in Prescott, a fitting tribute to the man who had seen potential for peace in a legendary gunfighter. Letter came from Governor Stanton today. Julia added, "He's retiring next month, wants you to speak at the ceremony." Tom's expression turned thoughtful. 15 years since we met. Hard to believe. Time passes differently when you're not counting notches on a gun, she observed with gentle humor. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a stagecoach, an increasingly rare sight now that the railroad handled most transportation. This particular coach was distinctive, painted a deep green with gold trim, clearly private rather than public transportation. As it rolled to a stop before the saloon, the door opened to reveal an elderly man in an expensive suit, assisted by a younger companion. Tom straightened, recognition lighting his eyes. "Colonel Caldwell," he said, moving to help the man down from the coach. Lawrence Caldwell, now well into his 80s but still carrying himself with military bearing, grasped Tom's hand firmly. "Not Colonel anymore," he corrected. "Just Lawrence these days." "What brings you back to Copper Creek?" Julia asked, embracing the old man warmly. "Your letter didn't say." "Unfinished business," Caldwell replied, his eyes moving to Tom. "And news I wanted to deliver in person." Inside the saloon, at the same corner table where they had once shared stories of Maria, Caldwell produced a small wooden box. "They're building a memorial in Silver Canyon," he explained, "for those who lost their lives there. Maria's name will be among them." Tom nodded, emotion flickering across his usually composed features. "It's fitting, long overdue. There's more." Caldwell opened the box, revealing a tarnished badge nestled on faded velvet. "This belonged to Sheriff Palmer of Pine Ridge. The last man to pursue the Desert Phantom before Jack Thorpe found you in Silver Canyon." He pushed the box across the table. "His daughter sent it, said her father would want you to have it, a symbol of how much has changed." Tom stared at the badge, its star dulled by age but still potent with meaning. "Why now?" "Because history is being written down at last," Caldwell explained. "The true history of the Desert Phantom, not just the legend. The Academy's influence has spread far enough that people want to understand how it began, where these ideas about justice and restraint originated." "In Jack Thorpe," Tom insisted. "In Maria." "In you," Caldwell corrected gently. "In the choices you made when no one expected them, when they ran counter to everything the West thought it knew about strength and power." That evening, the Golden Spur hosted a gathering unlike any it had seen before. Academy graduates from across the territory had arrived to honor Caldwell's visit, along with current trainees eager to meet the father of Maria Delgado, the woman whose influence had helped transform frontier justice. Tom moved among them with quiet dignity, still more comfortable behind the bar than in the spotlight. Yet there was no denying his central role in what these men and women represented. A new generation of peace officers who carried weapons but measured their worth by the conflicts they resolved without them. As the evening deepened, Caldwell asked for silence, raising his glass in a toast. "To absent friends," he began, "to Maria, to Jack Thorpe, to all those who showed us a better path than violence. And to Tom Ryder," added Governor Stanton, who had arrived unannounced for the occasion, "the man who proved that the greatest legends aren't made by the gun, but by the courage to set it aside." Tom acknowledged the toast with characteristic modesty, but those who knew him best could see the quiet satisfaction in his eyes. The Desert Phantom's legacy had been transformed from a tale of deadly skill to one of profound wisdom, exactly as Maria had hoped, as Jack had believed possible. Later, after the guests had departed and only Tom and Julia remained, they stood together on the porch of the Golden Spur, watching the stars emerge above Copper Creek. "Did you ever imagine this?" Julia asked, gesturing toward the peaceful town that had grown around them. "When you first arrived, hiding behind a bartender's apron?" Tom considered the question, his hand rising to touch the locket he still wore, Maria's constant presence against his heart. "No," he admitted. "I came here looking for obscurity, for a place to disappear. Instead, I found purpose. And now, your ideas are spreading across the entire West," she observed, "changing how justice works, how communities protect themselves." "Ideas that were always there," Tom corrected, "in men like Jack Thorpe, in women like Maria. I just found a way to give them voice." The night had deepened around them, the familiar sounds of Copper Creek settling into evening quiet. From the saloon behind them, came the soft glow of lamplight, illuminating the bullet holes that had been preserved not as reminders of violence, but as testament to its alternative. "Some choices echo longer than gunshots," Tom said softly, his arm slipping around Julia's shoulders. "Some legacies are built one quiet day at a time." They turned together toward the saloon door, toward the life they had built together, toward the future they had helped create. A future where the deadliest gunslinger in the West would be remembered not for the men he had killed, but for those he had taught to seek peace instead of vengeance. A future where legends could rest and ordinary men and women could find their own extraordinary paths toward redemption. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.